everyone, and welcome to the movie Change Up Mount Rushmore. I'm Joe Fricke, your host, and today we're going to be talking about what our Mount Rushmore is and various movie categories. And today we're focusing on comic book movies. If you don't know what we're talking about when we say, "Hey, this is our Mount Rushmore," it's kind of a big thing in sports talk radio of like, who's your Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks? And everyone kind of goes around the room and they explain why this is like who they would have representing all, these four people, four guys representing the quarterbacks of like NFL history, or maybe they're talking college history, or maybe just all time. So maybe you could put a Tim Tebow on there to represent all quarterbacks in college who maybe didn't do so well in the pros. But just kind of, everyone has their own thing of what they want to represent, and we are all just kind of here giving our explanation. I don't think we're going to get through all of our categories today because we're going to kind of set a time limit on this. We're going to try not to exceed 2 hours. So wherever we end up before we hit 2 hours is where we're going to stop. So today, some of the categories we're going to focus on is best comic book movie moment, worst comic book movie moment, comic book movie performance, comic book movie side character, comic book movie, and then we might also get to character music, fight scene, or creature slash animal from just any movie ever. So Johnny, what are your thoughts? How are you feeling about this, new idea? We've never done anything like this before. We've done a countdown before. We've done some drink-alongs. We've done some reviews, but this is our first ever kind of topic ever Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, this was one I actually brought to the group because like Joe said, I was listening to a sports podcast and it was a hockey one, and they were doing like all the Mount Rushmore of left wings, the Mount Rushmore of centers, and all that. And I thought it was a fun topic because it's not just like our favorite movies of the decade. It's what moments are maybe the most influential. Like you can have favorite in there, personal favorite, but you also have to kind of consider, even if this movie's not your favorite, what was the um, like impact that this scene had, or what was the impact that this film had, and things like that. I think it's a good conversation, and there's a lot of different kind of characteristics that go into something being uh, in the Mount Rushmore. It's not just these are my four favorite scenes. So I think that provides for a fun discussion, and we're going to kind of come to a consensus after we all do our fours, and there might be some back and forth on what makes it and what doesn't.
All right, and next up we have Bobby. Kind of, did you have any thoughts coming into this? Any strategies you tried to use when you were coming up with your Mount Rushmore, or were you just, hey, these are my favorite four?
I mean, for some of them, it popped off like right away. I knew that it was like these are at least two or three of my favorites that I wanted to include. Some I went for more like monumental kind of moments or performances or whatever, and some they were just this is what I like. So it was definitely interesting. I'm looking forward to see what I forgot, like what I didn't think of, because I'm sure that some just didn't even come to me at all as I was going through it.
All right, and Tristan, when you're hosting, you really don't like to ask me questions, so I didn't really have a question planned for you, but I will be nice. And is there anything you would like to say before we get started?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your list being terrible, I guess, because clearly you're coming into this in bad faith. But yeah, I'm excited because, like you said, it's hard to make cuts and stuff like this because it's not necessarily my top favorite scenes, my top favorite characters. It's the Mount Rushmore of those things. So it was hard to cut some scenes I love and some characters I love. But ultimately, I did go to, okay, what was the most monumental of these two scenes? Like if I came down to a list of, I've got 3, 4 scenes from one character or one franchise or one concept. What's the one out of all of these that is the most significant? So I'm excited to see your guys' logic and what you guys picked and compare that to each other's lists.
All right, awesome. We're gonna kind of do this in a clockwise fashion. I'm gonna give my four, then Johnny, next person up, will give his four, then Bobby will give his four, then Tristan his four. And so I'll just kick this thing off. Like I said, we're gonna do best comic book movie moment. So this is my Mount Rushmore of best comic book movie moments. And I forgot to say, one everyone has given their four. We will talk, discuss it out, and we will come up with the show's Mount Rushmore for best comic book movie moment, and we'll do that through each category. So, without further ado, I'm going to kick it off with Avengers End Game. That is the on your left portal scene. I think it represents the culmination of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with all of these characters from all of these movies, every character we've seen coming together to fight this villain that they have teased and shown for the last number of years. We also have from The Dark Knight the interrogation scene. I wanted something to represent DC. I think it's the best scene to ever come out of DC. You have DC's best hero versus DC's best villain. We have a great performance in there, and I just think it was, a great scene. And then I have from X-Men Days of Future Past, I put the Time in a Bottle Quicksilver scene. I wanted something to represent the X-Men, which is a franchise that's run in movies for 20 plus years. I think that scene is the perfect balance of taking something serious while also still being fun. And then finally, from the movie 300, I wanted to represent a non-superhero comic book scene. I have the This Is Sparta kicking into a well scene because I think it was just this massive, extremely popular movie scene when that movie came out. And I think it's a perfect representation for a non-superhero comic book movie. And so those are my 4.
Joe, I like what you did there. I have one similarity and a couple tweaks on yours, but here's mine. My first moment is also of the Avengers, but I think rather than them all coming together, I think the riskiest moment that they ever did in the franchise was the snap in Infinity War. I think every superhero movie is usually this, them saving the day at the end, and this was the first one that was really at the end of it. Thanos seems to win. You have all these characters disappear. You have the I don't feel so good, Mr. Stark moment, and all these goodbyes to characters. And people, I know, like fans like us, we know, okay, there's more movies coming out. Like obviously these guys are just coming back, but there are kids leaving the theater crying because these movies, at the end of the day, are mainly kids movies, and I think that's something that was super risky, and the Marvel universe is not exactly known for taking risks. So I like that a lot. My second scene, I agree with Joe. I have the Batman Joker interrogation scene in The Dark Knight. I think that, like Joe said, it's just one of the best acted scenes, and it's the most memorable moment from arguably the best comic book movie ever made. And then similar to Joe, having the Quicksilver one, I love that scene, and I considered it because I love the X-Men scenes that really showcase a mutant's powers, and that does a good job of it, but I think there's one that does it better. So I have from X2 the opening Nightcrawler scene of him going in to assassinate the president. I think that one was mind-blowing at the time, and it was something we hadn't seen before on screen, and something we haven't really seen since, but the X-Men franchise, when they nail a character, they nail a character, and that opening scene is awesome. And then similar to Joe, I went kind of outside of the Marvel DC realm, and I went with the hammer fight in Old Boy. I think that Old Boy is a fantastic comic book movie. It's a foreign film, but this is something that will get brought up later if we get to our fight scenes. But at the end of the day, most comic book movies are action movies, and this is the greatest action scene from any comic book movie. It's a one shot. The choreography is brilliant. You have him fighting just with a hammer, this horde of guys in this tight hallway. So I think it's one of the most incredibly filmed shots in any comic book scene, and all the choreography that went into it had to have been almost impossible to shoot, and they nailed it. So those are my 4. That's my Rushmore.
All right. Yeah, I was 50-50 between the Quicksilver scene and the Nightcrawler scene. So I'm glad that scene.
Those were the 2 I was debating on.
Yep. Bobby, you're up.
All right. Well, Joe, our lists were very similar, as you could maybe tell as you were going through it. But I do have my first one. I'm not going to go too much into it because we've already talked about it twice now, but that's the interrogation scene. I was going at first between that and the pencil, disappearing pencil trick that Joker pulls, but just having Batman and Joker together, you can't really get any better than that in the way that played out. I also had the on your left / portal scene, which is how I wrote it down and how you described it too. I do think this, I considered the snap, but I went for just kind of more the crowd pleasing cheer moment that kind of gave more chills rather than the kind of devastating ending type thing for, at least for kids or people that didn't know that there were more movies coming. I also had Quicksilver's Time in a Bottle scene in Days of Future Past. I think that was a really mind-blowing at the time. I mean, way to do the kind of slow motion thing and do it well and show super speed. And I thought that was just a really entertaining scene. And I couldn't leave off, even though it's another X-Men scene, I have Logan's death and the turning the cross into an X in Logan, because it's the first time we really see a major comic book hero that's been so long running die like that. I mean, we did see Iron Man later on, but Hugh Jackman from, 2000 until 2016, I think, with Logan was that character, and to kill him off in that way, I thought was pretty monumental.
All right, Tristan.
All right, I've got 4 scenes that none of you guys mentioned, but there are some similar crossovers in terms of movies that I used and franchise that I used. So my first scene here is from way back in 1978 from Superman the movie, and the scene that I picked is when Pa and Martha Kent first find Superman, and the baby Superman catches the truck. I think that's a really, really iconic image of Superman catching that truck, and I think it kind of sets the stage for superhero movies going forward. There hadn't really been a superhero movie before that, and I think that one scene really puts you in the mindset of this kind of otherworld adventure that comic movies can bring you on. So I picked that for Superman. In 2002, I went a little bit forward for Spider-Man, and the scene I picked here is the Uncle Ben conversation where he said, "With great power comes great responsibility." I think that conversation has been called back to so many times, and every version of Spider-Man has had a kind of a scene like that, and even in stuff like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and unrelated stuff, you've seen them reference that line. So I think that conversation, it focuses on the character, which is something that I think we don't see a lot in comic book movies, so I picked that as just a character beat scene. I picked one that I think builds out a larger universe, and that's You Think You're the Only Superhero, the post-credit scene of Iron Man from 2008, when Nick Fury finally shows up and meets with Tony Stark. I think that one scene kind of represents everything that comic book movies tried to do with like the shared universe of Marvel movies. And I think from that moment on, we all sit through the credits every comic movie you watch, just in case there's going to be something. And even in movies that aren't comic books, once in a while, they'll throw a post-credit scene in there just because of this one scene. So I do remember watching this specifically the moment that I saw it. So I think it's a pretty significant experience. And my last scene from 2010 is from Batman Under the Red Hood. I see Bobby has a Nightwing shirt on, so I went with a Nightwing adjacent kind of scene where Nightwing confronts Batman over not killing the Joker. It's the final scene of the movie. I think I wanted to throw some love to animated comic book movies, and I think that shows the emotional complexity that animated movies can bring that you can't necessarily get out of full franchises. Like, you need to establish characters a little bit more. And I think in the animated movies, you can kind of just run with storylines. So I gave that scene. It's a very emotional scene, and I think it shows the height that animated movies can reach for in this genre.
All right. Looks like we're going to have some interesting conversations, because no one had one where I was like, oh, that's a bad pick. Like, everyone had good picks. So is there any that are like locks at this point? I assume the Joker interrogation.
The interrogation, so far the biggest commonalities, the interrogation scene has 3, so I think that's a lock.
Yeah, that's
got to be on there.
And then the other one that had 2, nothing else had. Well, actually, the only 2, Bobby and Joe both had On Your Left, and they both had the Quicksilver time in a bottle scene. So, we could go consensus on that because 2 people had them, but I think we could do a quick little go around and get rid of a few of these.
Personally, when Tristan mentioned it, I think the with great power becomes great responsibility thing is a pretty important one. I would put that on there because, I was a little bit older than you guys when it came out, but everyone in school was quoting that for
that's
the
like
entire
a thing
year.
That they've put.
I agree.
They put an adaptation of that in every Spider-Man movie since then, so I think that definitely belongs on the list.
Yeah, so
I definitely think the interrogation scene belongs on the list. That was one that I would have had if I could have done 5 or 6, but I think that belongs in the conversation.
And
I think if you're looking at these moments, you got to go with things that. Like Tristan mentioned, I didn't even think of the post-credit scene in Iron Man. That's super influential, not only just for the scene itself, but for, like Tristan mentioned, nowadays, any superhero movie, even like WandaVision, the show, you're waiting till the end of the credits to see if there's another scene. So I like that one.
Are we all willing to give up our snap? Like, are you willing to give up your snap, and are Bobby and I willing to give up our portal scene for the post-credit scene? Because I feel like it's all kind of part of the
Marvel,
cinematic universe.
If you go,
idea.
I'm willing to give up the snap for sure. I think Tristan's has the, you go to a Marvel movie, you expect the post-credit scene. While ours are bigger moments, maybe for the franchise, Tristan's is definitely more influential to the films going forward. So I could see that. Yeah. So then the last spot.
Yeah, I'm willing to give up my, I don't know about Bobby, but I'm willing to give up. That for the post.
I am for sure, just for its what it did for Marvel and for any superhero movie going forward. I'm good with that.
And then I don't know. So what do we have so far? We have the interrogation scene, we have the post-credit scene, and we have
with great power becomes great responsibility. So
Mhm.
I would
Okay, we
put
have
up
DC
the
and Marvel.
Quicksilver scene, because we both have that as an X-Men moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely vouch for the Quicksilver scene. That's a great one. And even when you see him coming into WandaVision, people are like, "Oh, are they going to do a slow mo scene like they did in the X-Men movies?" So I think that's one that you want to represent X-Men somewhere on some of these lists. 20 years almost of
Right.
franchise.
Like I like the Logan and killing off the character. I think that was great, but just as a scene itself, like as a mind-blowing sequence, I think it's the Days of Future Past scene.
I agree. I was between that and the Nightcrawler scene. Personally, I prefer the Nightcrawler scene. I think it just because I like the character better. But I think your guys' Quicksilver one is a good one because for years and years and years, people told us you couldn't do a Flash movie because they don't know how to do super speed on screen and make it look cool. And that Quicksilver scene was like, you already see the impact that had in film with the Snyder's Justice League. Like, without that scene of the slow motion, I think they would still be trying to figure out how to do that superpower, which is a very common one for big heroes on screen. So I think that one is a little more influential just based on the impact it's going to have on other characters. So I agree. So, all right. So that brings our, but also shout out to, I was trying to think of a moment from Superman or like Batman 89, something that was older. A quick honorable mentions. I don't know if anyone else has them, but I had a different moment from Spider-Man. I had Spider-Man testing his web shooting on the roof. That was another scene that was like super monumental to other things, doing all the different like things. I am Iron Man, both in the first Iron Man and before he dies in End Game. Either one of those. Personally, I love the old boy eating the live squid scene, but that was never going to make it. And the one that was this close to making my list was Some Days You Just Can't Get Rid of a Bomb.
Very close on mine too. I wanted that.
I thought of
almost
that.
made it.
Thought
Almost.
of that. Yeah.
I tried very hard to get a Batman 66 representation somewhere in this list, and I just couldn't do it. I also want to give a shout out quickly to the Kingsman church action scene. That was a pretty cool scene. People talked about that throughout the whole movie.
That
so
was
it's one
almost,
that I try to get in.
That was almost on my list instead of 300, but I thought 300 was just too iconic not to put on the list.
That almost
was
made
a good
mine.
one I never would have thought of, and it's such a historic moment. Like, even from a movie that I don't really enjoy, that scene is awesome, and like Gerard Butler is great in that movie. That made his career. So that scene is
what
great.
is our
Another slow motion Snyder? So I have everything written down. I can do our consensus and then go into our next category. So our first moment on our Mount Rushmore of the best comic book movie scenes or moments is the interrogation scene in The Dark Knight. With great powers comes great responsibility is our next one from Spider-Man. And then the Iron Man, do you really think you're the only superhero post-credit scene is our third. And last but not least, the Quicksilver time in a bottle moment from Days of Future Past. So those are pretty strong four, and maybe four that I didn't expect going into it. Making it. I thought for sure that everyone would have a moment from the Avengers franchise, but we all, for the most part, had different ones. Bobby and Joe agreed. But all right, so that brings us to a discussion I'm more suited for this, and that is the worst comic book movie moment or scene. And I'm going to start us off, and I'm going to give you my four. Right off the bat, we have from Spider-Man 3, Dancing Tobey Maguire. That scene is awful. It was a franchise-killing moment, and it's just meme to death to this day, and people haven't come around on it. They just make fun of it more and more. That was an awful scene. My next one, all I have written down is Bat Nipples, but it's mainly them putting on their costumes and the weird close-ups of all their butts and groins and breastplates in Batman and Robin, with Robin, Batman, and Batgirl. The third one is Superman, the original Superman the movie, Superman flying around the world to reverse time. That's a super monumental film, but that's one of the worst moments in film history, and it needs to be idolized, I believe. And the last one is the worst moment in any film in history. It is the Martha scene in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Court scene. The Martha scene is just the worst part for me, is that it was clearly people sitting in a room said, oh, both their mom's name is Martha, and then reverse engineered the entire storyline around that stupid person, whoever's idea that was. And I think that's its biggest crime. I think you could have done something at least a little more clever with it, but it was so clear that that moment was reverse engineered, and those are always the worst moments in film when they take an idea and then change some plot points around to make that fit. So those are my 4. Bobby, what are your 4 worst comic book movie moments or scenes?
I have a couple of repeats, and I have one that is from one of your same movies, but a different scene. So I'll start with my different one. I have the basketball scene in Catwoman, in Halle Berry's Catwoman. I think that movie overall is just absolutely brutal, but that scene just encapsulates what's kind of wrong with it, and the way they shot it with Catwoman and her like outfit and everything. It's really bad. Not really much defending or much more to talk about. It's just a really bad movie and a really bad scene from it. I also have Emo Dancing Spider-Man. I remember seeing that in theaters and going along for a while being like, it's not as good as the first 2, but hopefully it picks up. And that scene happens and it was just like all downhill. And it's like, okay, what am I watching? So that's never really come, like you said, no one's really ever come around on it. It's still just memed and bad. I do have the Martha scene from Batman v Superman because of how much, if you saw our non-spoiler review, that I liked the Snyder cut. I went back and at least I watched the ultimate cut for like most of it again of Batman v Superman, which overall I enjoy the movie. It has a lot of problems, but it's way better than the theatrical. But that scene, because it takes itself so seriously and it's shot and executed so silly, it really pulls you out of it, and it just doesn't make sense. It does sound like it came from what Johnny said, where you're reverse engineering a reason to do that. And also because it's more, if you wanted to get to that and have Martha be the thing that pulls Batman out of that moment where he's going to kill Superman, Superman should say, "Save my mom, Martha Kent." And he should say, and Martha should just snap him and not say, "Why did you say that name?" and yell at him like that. If you want to try to have that be okay, that's what you do. So that scene is brutal. Then from Batman and Robin, instead of them putting their suits on and doing all that, I have the entire auction scene with with Poison Ivy with the Bat credit card, which in a movie that is a comedy, I feel like you could have put that in Batman 66 where he has a Bat credit card and it would fit. But in a movie that almost killed a franchise, I just had to include one of the silliest moments. So that's my 4.
All right, Tristan, what's your 4? And am I gonna get any more BVS slander?
I think you might, because me and Johnny, as much as we disagree on some stuff, we have a couple of crossovers here on this list. I think we're gonna have a lot of crossovers in this section comparatively to other sections. My first one is from Superman the movie, 1978. Superman flying around the world and turning it backwards. And a movie that I love and that generally I like every other scene. It's that one scene at the end, and unfortunately, it's like the emotional climax of the movie, so you can't just like overlook it. It's primary. It's like prominent. So it doesn't ruin the movie, but I think it represents a great movie that has another otherwise terrible scene at the end that holds it back. And we've talked about it a couple times already. Look, I love Batman v Superman. It's one of my favorite comic book movies, to be honest. But it's hard to defend it when it has that Martha scene in there because the writing is just terrible. The delivery is not good at all either. Everything about it feels like they just didn't think it through fully, and it feels like, oh, it was in like the first draft. Similar to what you guys are saying, they probably thought like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they kind of connected over the fact that their moms are both Martha, and they never thought it through like beyond that. And it's frustrating because like it could be good and it's just not. So that's why it's on my list. And one scene that I think people didn't talk about on here much and didn't get talked about much at all is from Kingsman: The Golden Circle in 2017. Where the hero just kind of casually sexually assaults a woman for the good of the country. He gets a mission, if you haven't seen it, to stick some kind of tracker on a woman at this music festival, and the only way you can do it is by hooking up with her and inserting it into her sexual regions, I think you would say. And not a great scene.
Yeah. It has to go through an orifice, so...
Yeah, an orifice, you call it.
I have not seen that movie, and I
forgot about that, Tristan, and that's a really good call.
It's so bad because the first one was really great out of nowhere. People were like really excited for this franchise, and then this movie came along, and it was like, oh, everybody hates this now. And this scene kind of cements like everything that was wrong with that second movie. And my last scene is from a very recent movie from last year, Wonder Woman 1984, where it turns out that Steve Trevor comes back, but he's just a random guy actually. And you could have had Steve Trevor come back in 1,000 ways. Why is he possessing this random person? Why are you making this weird implication of Wonder Woman having sex with this guy that she doesn't even know, and he's not consenting to it, and they're in his house just looking at his pictures and his things? It really cements like that movie's failures, I think. A movie that also could have been great, but then just kind of flopped on its face after a really good debut movie. So those are my scenes, my 4.
Tristan, heavy on the sexual assault. Joe,
Yeah.
what are your moments?
I'll say
for worst?
three of the moments I have are moments that other people had. One of the moments is from a movie I think 2 of you had, but not the same moment. So I'll start off my first moment from the original Superman. It's like everyone said, it's Superman spinning the earth backwards. It's a shitty scene. Everyone's talked about why it's bad. I don't really need to. My second moment from Spider-Man 3, the emo dance. It's garbage. It's terrible. It was spoofed in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Makes no sense. It's supposed to be comedic, maybe? I don't really know. However it was supposed to be portrayed, it's not good. My third moment is from Catwoman. It's the basketball scene, because no part of that movie is good, and that's the worst part of that movie. And then my final scene from Batman and Robin, I have the creation of Bane, because I think it's a terrible scene, and then it's the perfect encapsulation of the total misunderstanding or misuse of a character, because Bane is like physically stronger and just as smart as Bruce Wayne / Batman, and in this movie they turn him into a Pokemon where he just has the intelligence to say his own name, and so I put the creation of Bane. I just put as my 4th, and those are my 4 Mount Rushmore picks.
Yeah. I will have to say, because I'm the only one that left it off, I did consider the Superman going around the Earth for sure as a really bad scene, but it just kind of just missed. So I'm perfectly fine with that being on there.
I left off the Spider-Man 3 dancing scene because I don't think it's all that bad. I think it gets a lot of undeserved hate. But
Tristan
I mean,
likes
we're
the
doing a
dancing.
Mount Rushmore, so what am I supposed to? I mean, like, this is talked about more than almost any other scene in comic movies, so I'm fine with it getting on there, even though I think it kind of fits the tone of the movie that he was going for.
Yeah, my thing is, I think, like, obviously a sexual assault scene in Kingsman 2 is a worse moment than that, but we're going for, like, influential, like, historic worst moments. I've never seen Kingsman Golden Circle, and I didn't know that scene existed. If you haven't seen Spider-Man 3 but are on any form of social media, you've seen that dancing scene. So I think the consensus on those, obviously we only have 2 spots left because we're going Superman reverses time, against all odds and physics, and we're going with the emo dance.
Science. Yeah.
So
we have to have
with that being
something to see
said,
from Batman and Robin, because
we had 3 different
Batman and
scenes
Robin,
from
we
it.
just all
Three
had 3
different
different
ones.
scenes.
my argument for well, let's all make an argument, because Tristan, you did not have a Batman and Robin scene, correct?
No, I didn't.
So Joe, me, and Bobby, real quick, make an argument for why yours should be on, and then Tristan vote for which moment should make it.
I can go first, because I'm just going to more reiterate what I already said, because I feel like what I wanted to represent is a lot of these bad comic book movie scenes come from total misunderstandings or misuses of the character, and I think the creation of Bane is that, where they completely changed his backstory, completely did everything. And some movies, they'll change the backstory, but the final product of the character is still the same. This one, the backstory is completely different. The final product is like the complete opposite of the character that's in the comics. The only thing about him that's the same is he's strong, and kind of the look of the character, everything, the personality, everything about him is different. And the scene's bad, so you didn't even change it to make a good scene. You changed it, and the scene still came out bad.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any defense for either scene that either of you guys chose, but I think I could have gotten what they were going for. Bobby's movie, I mean, Batman and Robin is made to make toys, and having the Bat credit card is kind of an homage to that. Like, this is a goofy thing, and we're selling this to kids, and it is kind of a funny moment if you're drunk watching that. I can get some enjoyment out of it. Joe's, I think, the Bane thing, it was just they felt like they needed a strong henchman, and they didn't know about the character. I love Bane, and I hate what they did to him, but man, like, yeah, I hate that, but they made Bane look like a toy, and he was just sold to come in packs with Poison Ivy to sell a character that's a woman because he couldn't sell girl toy characters. And then I think for mine is all of them getting dressed like it's supposed to be this big monumental scene in the movie of all of them coming together, and you just have these really awkward shots of their butts and their groins and their breastplates, and it's kind of the epitome of everything Joel Schumacher failed at in making the Batman movies, because the design of the characters was so bad that I think having something that dealt with the main characters and how they're actually looked, it's kind of the like the personification of everything that Schumacher failed to do in that franchise and killed it for doing so. So I think mine's just a more important moment as far as bad, but they're all horrible scenes.
Yeah, and for mine, I would just say, because I'm saying like that auction scene, it incorporates the terrible dialogue that's in the movie. It has a whiny Robin, which is a really terrible character. It has Batman buying a woman, which is not great. And then it also just, I think it completely, if it hadn't already jumped the shark with the credit card, where it's like, okay, well, you're just either trying to make a comedy, which they weren't, but they kind of did, or it's just like like you said, it's a thing that, oh, they're trying to sell toys, and that kind of hits on that. So that's kind of all I would say for that, is it shows more of the problems. Is that why I went with that? Even though I think Johnny's is the more memed moment. So that is the more talked about one with the bat nipples. So
I think the most mean moment too is one none of us said, with all of them awkwardly looking at each other in that circle.
Yeah,
and
that's just poor editing. And like.
So Tristan, after our arguments, who do you judge? Who deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore out of these three scenes?
I have a couple seconds because a couple of days ago I rewatched Batman and Robin with the commentary on from Schumacher, so he actually did give thoughts and justification for all three of these scenes as he was going through them. The justification for the Bane scene was that the studio wanted, like you guys said, to insert another toy character you could sell along with the other characters, but he also thought it was important to give a villain who can be a big brute force and fight alongside Poison Ivy, who's sort of like a mental force. So that was his kind of logic at that scene. I don't know if he necessarily paid that off or not.
The brains in the brawn type of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what they were going for.
Yeah,
and when
he
got to the nipples and the butts and everything else at the beginning, he said he was shocked that people were shocked about it. He said, it's called, quote, Schumacher, people have to go out more. So he was totally shocked that people were put off by these nipples and these butts. He said he wanted to give his film some adult sex appeal. So that was his attempt to give it adult sex appeal.
In a kid's movie.
And finally, the bidding scene. It was pretty much instituted entirely because the studio wanted them to do a product placement for the Visa credit card.
Yeah.
So the studio was like, guys, you have to give insert for
and
this
that's
Visa
what
credit
I was.
card.
Yeah.
So I do think ultimately that last scene, the bidding scene for me, is the one that stands out as the worst. Not it has what Joe's going for with a character that they do badly, which is Poison Ivy, but it also has the really forced placement of product placement, which is something that you see in all these kind of toyetic movies like this. And it also just is very tasteless. It's all style without anything beneath it, and that just feels like it sums up Batman and Robin pretty well. So I'm gonna go with Bobby's scene there, the bidding war.
All right.
All right.
And we have that's our third. So
I agree after you heard the justifications of them all. Like, I think Schumacher is totally wrong on his justifications, but the fact that I think having one moment that kind of encapsulates an era of film that studios like ruin superhero movies by being like, you need this product or you need to do this. I think that kind of does a good job encapsulating that.
Okay.
So we still need a fourth moment, right?
Need a fourth.
We need one more moment. We didn't have any other. Actually, the only other commonality we had is
Martha.
Two of you.
Is that on there already?
Oh, the
I feel
Martha
like the Martha
scene
scene has to be
not.
on there. That's
Yeah.
pretty
The
much
Martha
like a
scene,
modern.
I was gonna say actually the basketball scene. Two people said, but I would argue it's just like the seesaw scene in Daredevil. It's just like a movie that failed and no one really cares about.
That's why I think the Martha, especially the Ultimate Cut, that actually like it's an actually story that is told well, even if the story is just okay. That's just such a bad moment.
Yep. All right, so we have four. Quickly, does anyone have any honorable mentions? I'll go through mine just real quick.
Yeah,
I did have my first.
Kind of has to go.
My first honorable mention was the Catwoman basketball scene, so I had that. I had the Daredevil seesaw fight. I had the tornado killing Kevin Costner in Man of Steel. I think that scene is terrible, especially because the rest of that movie is pretty good. I had the Howard the Duck sex scene. But that was another one that I was like, it's the worst scene of any of these, but no one knows what it is. I have this is Katana,
I had that as
Suicide Squad. That was an
Yeah.
honorable. And then I had the Batman Forever, actually, Robin doing his laundry. That almost made it. That one was really bad because that's literally why Alfred decided Robin should become Robin, because he does his fucking towels with his feet. And then I had X-Men Origins, Deadpool having his mouth sewn shut. Those were my honorable mentions. I had a lot of them. This was a tough one to kind of narrow it down, but I was happy with the 4 that I chose.
Yeah, I didn't really like write any other. I considered for
Yeah.
sure the Daredevil scene, and I considered This Is Katana. The other thing I was trying to find, but there's not like one particular scene, is just throughout the whole movie, is Nicole Kidman's like entire character in Batman Forever, where she's just like thirsting after Batman the whole movie, and it's really,
Yeah, but
really
can you blame her?
right. Yeah,
It's
Val
Val
Kilmer.
Kilmer.
I know it's Val
Who's
Kilmer.
hotter than
It's,
Val Kilmer?
it's Iceman.
Yeah, but that I thought was just like in a movie that I really liked as a kid. Is like I can't even. Her character is so
Yeah, it's
brutal
pretty
in
bad.
that.
It was.
But yeah.
Before we
That's
separated.
another one of like Green Lantern. I couldn't think of a specific moment, but I was like,
Smoke.
the whole movie.
It's
is
like
tough.
just Galactus in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The,
before-
Or
Yeah,
not
the cloud
Galactus.
guy.
Not whatever that guy.
Yeah, before we separated this into best comic book movie and
Not
worst
Galactus.
comic book movie moment, and we just had the Mount Rushmore of comic book movie
Parallax,
moments.
Bobby.
I
know,
had
that's-
the Catwoman basketball scene in my Mount Rushmore because I'm like, a lot of comic book movie scenes are bad, so one of them needs to represent the bad scenes in comic book movie moments.
That's true.
But yeah, we do have a
All right.
Paul sighting before you read off our Mount Rushmore.
All right, let's get to Paul comment, and then I'll go over our Rushmore.
Yeah, Paul said that they like this format and they hope we do it again. So
Cool. All right. Thank you, Paul.
Positive feedback. I like that.
Our most loyal listener, Paul.
Yep.
That's not related to us. All right, so that means our movie change-up consensus on the worst comic book movie moments or scenes is Superman reverses time by flying around the world. Peter Parker doing an emo dance scene. The bidding scene in Batman and Robin with the Bat credit card. And Martha.
Why'd you say that name?
Why'd you say that name? So yeah, those are our moments. Too bad DC had 3 of our top 4, which shows the highs and lows of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, on my
that-
list I had
that
like 10
universe.
DC scenes, and I was like, well, I gotta get like 1 or 2 scenes here that aren't DC, so let's find one.
I thought 3 of mine made the list, and my one scene that didn't was also a scene from Batman and Robin. So I'll take it. I thought those were kind of a slam dunk. Some of those. So Bobby, that leads you to comic book movie performances. I'm really interested to hear what's on everyone's top 4.
This was tough because there are a lot of really good performances. And when you're just trying to compare like one movie, it was kind of tough. So I went more monumental type performances in mine. So I don't know if my list is going to be similar or not to yours, but I went with Ledger's Joker, which is, we've talked about Heath Ledger as the Joker for years now. First comic book movie character, at least a true comic book movie, to be nominated and win an Oscar. And it was just, very unfortunate with his death, just before the movie came out. But what a monumental performance and movie for the genre. So that's he was like my number 1. You have to have him on there. My next one I have is Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I put down in Logan just because I think that's where he's given the most range to do his thing. But to play that character for 15, 16 years and just encapsulate Wolverine, even if he didn't look the part when he was cast, when people kind of thought, oh, well, Wolverine has to be short, he has to be this and that. And now everyone just thinks of him as Wolverine, so I had to include him. I also have Christopher Reeve as Superman. He was one of the first movies that took comic book seriously, and I think his performance, where he really took the time to get to know the character and how he would physically portray Clark Kent and Superman. I know it's in the second one, but when he changes from Superman to Clark Kent, or vice versa, actually in the apartment or hotel, whatever it is like, it really encapsulates what, like, he took it really seriously. He knew exactly what he needed to do. It's what everyone kind of looks back on as Superman, even though I really like Henry Cavill. Then the last one I have is Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. I picked the first Iron Man. It started the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If that movie doesn't work, then there's no MCU, because even though they did have that Avengers setup, If that movie doesn't work and people don't fall in love with Iron Man, then the MCU just doesn't happen.
Solid 4.
Yeah.
Tristan, what
Yeah,
are
your picks
yours?
are terrible. I'm gonna tell you that right now. All 4 of your picks are bad.
Wow, we're on fire, Joe.
Yeah, 3 out of 4 of your picks are pretty good. I'll say that going into my list here. So my first list is mentioned by Bobby. I'm sure we'll all, at least some of us will have mentions of this. Heath Ledger as the Joker. How do you top that? I mean, we said it a million times, but that was such an incredible, engaging performance, and I think that particular performance brought a lot of eyes to comic book movies who otherwise wouldn't have watched them. Like the hype going into that movie was beyond comic book nerds. It was just like random movie nerds and people who were like, "Oh, I heard this guy's acting was really good," and we see it all the time now. People who get cast and everyone's like, "Oh, they could never play the part," then they just do great anyway. So I think that kind of embodies that. Whenever you see a mold-breaking casting, everybody says, "Oh, well, Heath Ledger, he was good as the Joker." You never know. So that's why I went for him. I have a different pick for you guys. Someone that not exactly a franchise, kind of a franchise, I guess you'd say. But I think it portrays how you can play a comic book character and make it completely your own. Just bring your own style, your own tone to it, and just completely break the mold and make your own character. And that's Jim Carrey as the Mask from 1994.
Oh,
It's a good
Nothing
one.
like the source material, but it embodies Jim Carrey in every way, everything that is crazy and weird about it. I was going to pick his Riddler, but that came out a year after this, so I think this kind of like set the stage for his Riddler, and I think it's a much better, much more memorable, engaging performance than Riddler. So I went with that. Another Bobby pick, I have Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I also went with Logan, so I think that's his best movie, but like you said, 17 plus years playing the character, that's something you rarely see in movies like this. Usually people come in for like a trilogy or so, like, and then leave. I think being able to see him grow with the character as an actor, as an all-star, kind of growing into being Wolverine and being Hugh Jackman, the icon we know him as now. That's why I picked Hugh Jackman. And lastly, another Bobby pick, Christopher Reeve as Superman. 40 years later now, people can't be cast in the role without being compared to him. So I think setting that standard this many decades later is hugely significant. Bobby mentioned that it was one of the first movies to take this genre seriously, and I think that's important too for this kind of a list. But I also think the fact that he's still iconic this many years later, you see stuff like Superman Returns that comes out where they're just trying to emulate that role, and stuff like Superman and Lois on CW that's definitely throwing back to that role. This guy definitely set the standard for this character and for comic book heroes in general as performances. So those are my 4 picks for that.
All right. Well, yeah, your picks are bad too. See, this is how your list should go. So first off, I can't believe anyone didn't pick him. I have Heath Ledger from The Dark Knight. He won the Oscar, and I wanted someone to represent DC. So obviously you got to go with him, and he's the only villain on my list, so I got to have someone to represent the villains.
I've heard it's a good movie. I'll probably see it someday.
And then another one that I'm surprised no one else had I just kind of did body of work. I didn't really pick a single movie, but if I were to pick a single movie, I would pick Avengers End Game, and that's Robert Downey Jr. For the role of Tony Stark. Another one that you guys should have had, can't believe you didn't, add Hugh Jackman from Logan, It was the finale to a character, it was the first time, Bobby brought up earlier, it was the first time we saw one of our lead heroes die, and I think he portrayed that in a really serious way, where earlier comic book films it probably could have been more comedic and more jokey, but it was a very emotional, powerful moment. And then finally, how you guys didn't have this is beyond me. I have Christopher Reeve from Superman. He was basically the original comic book hero, and I feel like he captured both hero and the alter ego's personality both very well, because a lot of times the debate is they're a good hero, but their alter ego persona isn't very good, or they're very good at the alter ego but they're not very good as a hero, and I think he did both very well. And so that is my 4 picks.
Yeah. Before I forget to mention it, because obviously we had the same picks here, but as we're talking about superhero deaths, I almost did include Cyclops getting killed by Jean Grey, the Phoenix, in Last Stand is a terrible scene because they just handled that character so terribly.
Oh yeah, that's another not good one.
I totally forget about that movie.
Yep, me too.
All right, so going into it, I figured these, the 4 that are already going to be our consensus, essentially, I figured would probably be. So I want to give some love to some other performances. Tom Hiddleston as Loki is great. Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. Joaquin Phoenix's performance as the Joker is also great. That carries that whole movie. Vincent D'Onofrio as Edgar in Men in Black. Sugar, water. He's awesome in that. I love that performance. Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier. And then one of my honorable mentions, which will be on our list, is Christopher Reeve as Superman. But my 4 are Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Talked about that. Logan's his best performance, but I'd maybe say X2 is probably the most iconic one. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Again, his best performance probably End Game. Heath Ledger as the Joker in The Dark Knight. And my 4th is one that's not on anyone's list, but I think is one of the best performances in any comic book movie because you have more depth of character than any other comic movie, and that's Choi Min-sik as Daisu in Old Boy. I think his performance in that movie is incredible. And you go from hating him to rooting for him to hating him and then feeling pity for him, and he has just this whole range, and I think that performance is incredible, but I don't think it's as iconic, obviously, as Chris Reeve as Superman. So I think that one is a pretty easy consensus top 4 for us because we had pretty much outside of Jim Carrey's The Mask and Daisu, everything else is the same for everybody else.
Yeah.
So
I do have to shout out really quick Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach. I couldn't
cool.
find a reason to put him on the list, but he was just outside of it. I at least considered him.
Yeah, I had him and replaced him with Jim Carrey. I was trying to figure out one that was just like an outside of a franchise, kind of off the wall pick, and I think The Mask fits that a lot more than Watchmen for me. But that's one that definitely would get. If I was doing a top 5 of my personal picks, it'd probably be on there. But we're doing Mount Rushmore, so I had to cut it off.
Yep.
Also, shout out to Wesley Snipes as Blade. Really great in that movie, and it, encapsulated that character well. So that gives us a pretty easy consensus Mount Rushmore, and that gives us Heath Ledger as the Joker, Oscar winner for Best Supporting Actor. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. All these years later, he'll always be known as Iron Man, no matter how many movies they make after. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, same thing there. It's impossible to recast that and have it be as good as the original. And Christopher Reeve as Superman, one of the most iconic roles of all time. So, all right. Tristan, that leads us to you.
Yeah, you have,
and Joe, what's our category?
Our category this time is comic book movie side characters.
All right, so for comic book movie side characters, I had a bit of a hard time narrowing down what is a side character and what's not, so you might have some interesting debates on that here. But my first pick here from 1978 Superman the movie, I have Jor-El, played by Marlon Brando. I think he really profoundly sets the thematic stage for Superman. He has those really classic quotable lines like, "Oh, they can be good people, my son. They wish to be," those kind of things. I think he, in a movie that could have been very, very cheesy and very just like, oh, he's Superman, he's saving people, it gives it a heart. It gives it some kind of like elevation that makes it a little more operatic than some of the stuff we are used to. Like, it's not Batman on the ground fighting crime. There's some kind of bigger thematic scale to this. And I think in 1978, that was very ahead of its time for superhero movies. And we see that come back now and stuff like Man of Steel. I think that influence of that role is still seen today. My second pick from 2002's Spider-Man, I have J. Jonah Jameson, the hilarious, wisecracking owner of the Daily Bugle. J.K. Simmons gave an incredible performance. I almost put him on my list of performances. I think he is the most quotable, most memorable part of that entire movie. I think you see it on Far From Home. He comes back in the post-credit scene. That performance, that character is just so memorable. And you've seen that influence even the Lego games, even the TV shows. Everything has kind of made their characters similar, made the version of J. Jonah Jameson similar to this version of J. Jonah Jameson. So that's my pick. And for 2008, The Dark Knight, I have James Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, of course. I think he gives a level of humanity to that story. I think he portrays the character perfectly. I think if you're talking support characters, side characters, he's like the definitive version of that. He's there to give Batman support. He's not stealing scenes. He's not stealing the story. He's there to be Batman's support. And I think it's a great performance on top of that. It's one of the more iconic performances of a comic book movie, so I picked that. And for my last one, I picked Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson. I picked him for the Avengers, but really he's showed up in a bunch of movies, and I think he is the kind of character you can show up and elevate a movie in the MCU. Like when you see him show up in Far From Home, you see him show up in Iron Man 2, he gives that sense of continuity, of connection, of kind of elevating the story. You're saying, oh, look, here's Nick Fury. And I think Samuel L. Jackson plays him brilliantly. He's like spot off the page. And similarly to J. Jonah Jameson, everything after this has been pretty much Samuel L. Jackson based in terms of comics and animation. So you see the influence of that character as well. So those are my picks.
All right. Yeah, I have some
I like that.
similarities.
Those are some good ones that A couple I didn't think of actually. So Joe, I'm
Mhm.
interested to hear yours.
All right, my number one pick is part of the reason. So I was the one that came up with this category idea, and so my number one pick and the reason why I came up with this category was Alfred. I mean, if I wanted to pick one, I'd probably go the Dark Knight because I feel like that's where he's best. But I kind of just did the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole, and I wanted a character that kind of plays that parental figure of a hero, and I wanted him to represent that. And I feel like Alfred is kind of the perfect representation of that. And then I went with Lois Lane from the OG Superman movie, played by Margo Kidder. She's kind of the original love interest, and I liked her because she had kind of her own ambitions. And obviously, there were times where Superman showed up and saved her, but she wasn't like a fully like just like ditzy damsel in distress. She had her own kind of agency and did her own things. And then I wanted someone to represent kind of that best friend role of the hero, and I went with Ned from the current Spider-Man trilogy. I think so far he's kind of the best version of that. And then finally, like Tristan, I went with Nick Fury from the MCU. He's kind of like the leader and to a certain extent almost the face of the MCU because he's kind of the one that he doesn't really have his own story. He just kind of hops in and around different movies. So
Wow. I thought for sure we would all have J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. That is
yeah, when he
on
said
mine.
JK, I'm like shit. I forgot about
Yeah,
him. But
that was one I think was maybe a forgotten
And
about.
if I considered him a side character, I probably would have picked Nick Fury. But he's prominent in a lot of movies, but he's side in a lot of movies.
I
So
didn't really consider him
yeah,
for it, but that's another one that might end up making it. But my four are obviously J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. We've set it up. I mean, they're bringing him back because no one else can play that role. He is the encapsulation of that character. I also have Michael Caine's Alfred in the Dark Knight trilogy, probably the Dark Knight for the just alone the story about the burning down the jungle. I also, like Joe, have Margo Kidder's Lois Lane from Superman the movie, the original love interest, the most important character. I thought maybe she wouldn't count as a side character because she has a super prominent role, but if Joe's counting it, I'm counting it. And I have for my fourth one that none of you have picked. I have Rip Torn as Zed in Men in Black. I think as the kind of the captain of the Men in Black that sends him on the mission, he's so perfect in that role. I can't picture anyone else doing that. R.I.P. Rip Torn. He was amazing as Zed in all of those movies. So why are you laughing? Is he not dead?
No, just Rip. Sorry, it was a bad joke.
R.I.P. Rip Torn. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought he died, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So R.I.P. Rip. Rip Torn, the greatest stage name probably ever. Yeah. And he's awesome as Zed in every movie, but he's great in the first one. Just the yelling at the little aliens carrying in the cigarettes, like everything he does, he's so funny, but he's also seems like this intimidating presence, and I think he kind of nails it. He very much like J.K. Simmons just really embodies that role super perfectly for me. So those are my four.
Okay. All right. So for my four, I'll start with just the commonality for sure. It's J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Like that's the first thing I wrote down as soon as side character popped up. He's perfect. We've said enough about that. I also had Alfred and I did not put Michael Caine's version just because I considered him a supporting character in those movies because he's so prominent for most of them. So I put Michael Goff, who was from Batman through Batman and Robin, because he's a smaller role in a lot of those
Jared
movies.
Goff's father.
Yes, yeah, spelled very differently. But I just found him. He's still who I kind of picture in my head as like the live action Alfred, because I grew up with it. So Michael Caine, I think, is amazing in those movies, but I see him as Michael Caine. So I would be fine going either way with that. Michael Caine. For my third one, it's just I wanted to represent animated somewhere on this list, kind of like Tristan had done before, and it's one of my favorite movies. So I went with Spider-Man Noir, voiced by Nicolas Cage in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I think he's hilarious. He provides the perfect comedic relief in that movie, and it's one of Nicolas Cage's best roles, and he's just doing the voice. I think that's perfect. He makes me laugh every time. So that's where I went there. And my last one, which was kind of a cheat, but I think it's worth representing here, and that is Stan Lee in every Marvel movie as the cameos. He was kind of revealed to be a watcher a little bit in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, so you can say that he's a character showing up in all these, but he's shown up in 20 plus movies now as a one little spot character, and everyone cheers when he's on screen. So for something that represents Marvel in that, I think that's where I'm going with that one.
All right, and fun fact, I looked it up. Rip Torn's real first name, Elmore. So
Good choice. Johnny is muted.
Choice I'm making her Rip. I feel like it's a little more engaging than Elmore.
yeah,
Elmore
Yep.
Torn. Yeah, Rip Torn. Great name though.
Oh yeah.
Elmore Rural Torn Jr. You know.
All right, so that shout out to a couple of my honorable mentions. I had I really came around to this performance because I never liked it originally, but Rachel in The Dark Knight, not in the original Batman Begins, but in The Dark Knight. What's her name? I'm blanking on it right now.
Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Maggie Gyllenhaal. Yeah. I never really liked her, and then I started watching her other films and really appreciated her, and then liked her more and more as Rachel. So I had her. I had Korg from Thor Ragnarok, and then I had Macho Man Randy Savage's Bonesaw is ready. I've got you for 3 minutes. Michael, my brother and I were talking about this before. That's like the most quoted line we ever do. So I had that because I love that role so much, and he's just so perfect in it. But I couldn't really justify him being over the people that I did because they're more iconic. But yeah, before we get to our consensus, does anyone else have like honorable mentions or someone you want to give a shout out to or you were debating on?
I had one that I replaced Nick Fury with, and that was Doopinder from Deadpool 1 and 2, as more of like a comedic character.
The taxi driver, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too, actually.
I was considering Vanessa from Deadpool. I wanted to give a love interest shout out. I was going between her. I think she gave a lot of heart to that movie. I also wanted to thinking about Peggy Olson. I think she was a good through line in the first Captain America. And I think she's come back a few times, and even in those small roles, she's had a pretty big impact on the audience. But it's hard doing. This is like it's probably one of the hardest categories to narrow down because there's just so many great supporting roles in these movies.
Yeah, I think we'll start off with obviously J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson.
Yep.
That was on pretty much everyone's list, and Joe maybe just didn't think about it.
Yeah. I didn't really look anything up for any of these. I just kind of went off my head, you know.
Yeah, I did too, and that was actually one I thought of a little later. But I had it on as soon as I thought of it. I was like, oh, obviously he's got to be on there. But that was not like my first thought. My first thought was Michael Caine's Alfred. So I think Alfred deserves to be on.
Yeah.
Bobby chose a different one.
Yeah.
But Tristan,
I would pick Michael
Caine
Caine for sure,
Yeah.
but I just considered him a supporting character. So that's the only reason I didn't have him.
Yeah, Alfred's one of those that I feel like just kind of slipped my mind or something. Like it's hard to make a list of just 4, but I think Alfred's got to be on there. I think Michael Caine's the iconic Alfred, so we got to go with that.
Yeah, I honestly just didn't go for Gary Oldman's Gordon only because I was already going with Alfred, and I thought that was a little more prominent in terms of like iconic lines and moments and things like that.
Why do we fall?
And then the other one that I think both Joe and I had was Margo Kidder as Lois Lane. Yeah, I don't think either of you had that, though.
No, and again, I thought when I was picking mine, it was kind of before we talked about it. It was too big of a role for me, but if she counts, then yeah.
Like I wasn't like worried about like when I made this, like I couldn't think about how to word this because I was more going for like I didn't want characters that were like Falcon and like just like these other characters that are like basically heroes themselves. I wanted more like, hey, these are the non-human or like non-hero characters that are just kind of around the heroes.
So what do you guys just as a consideration think of Stan Lee as the cameo?
I think that was a good one.
Yeah, like when you said it, I'm like, I kind of like that as a choice. If we did like The Watcher and then in quotes Stan Lee from the MCU.
I think just because he's so iconic to every movie, like Tristan mentioned with the post-credit scene, any Marvel movie you went into, you were waiting for that Stan Lee cameo.
Yep.
And I think that counts. While he's not specifically one character, I think it makes sense. I really like that and give some love to,
and if
Stan Lee, maybe the greatest comic creator of all time.
And if I had to pick one, it would honestly actually be the comic book seller in Spider-Verse because he has like the most impact on the story.
Anyone can wear the suit type thing. Yeah, definitely.
I would go because it's the funniest one of Deadpool.
Yeah, that's a
the
good
DJ.
Yep, DJ.
That was apparently his
favorite
too, which
Yeah.
You can buy Love too for whatever the money, however much it was. Yeah.
So
he has a good cameo too in the Spider-Man video game as a owner of a restaurant that Peter and MJ go to.
I thought you were going to say because he does the. Yeah, the old school Spider-Man video games, he does the voiceover to set up the scenes and stuff. Like we had the PlayStation, I think, version or whatever. But yeah, that was always good.
So I think we should go with Stan Lee cameos. So that leaves us with one more spot, and basically it comes down to the only one we had similarities on. Well, actually, I think shout out to Spider-Man Noir. I think that's a great choice, but maybe not as iconic. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Ned from Homecoming and stuff. I agree with Joe. I think that's a great role. Jonathan Van Allen's a star, and then shout out to obviously Gary Oldman as James Gordon. But it really comes down to
we already had a Batman one though, so I wouldn't want like two, like Alfred.
And exactly, and we already had another one. So it comes down to the person that showed up on two lists, which are two different people, and that is Margo Kidder as Lois Lane or Nick Fury, Samuel Jackson. It's a tough decision because to me, both encapsulate, like, you have the ultimate love interest. You have Lois Lane is probably the most famous side character ever. It's probably the one that's more of a household name. Nick Fury's probably not far behind. And Samuel Jackson really encapsulates that character well. But if I think it should come down to a vote, and I'll start the voting with, I chose Lois Lane, so I'm going to vote Margo Kidder, I think, on this one.
I'd like to make a quick argument for Nick Fury before we start on the voting, because I think he's been consistent throughout the whole Marvel universe, whether it was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something that's not even movies. He's been in all of this stuff, and he's been consistently there. I think Margot Robbie, she was very present in Superman 1. She was very present in Superman 2. Superman 3, she had like a couple scenes. Superman 4, I don't think she was even in it. She kind of faded out by the end of the franchise, and I think Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury deserves some credit for sticking out through all of these movies and still being relevant and not kind of diving out in the franchise after 2 movies. He's been here the whole entire time.
I agree, but here's my argument as to why Lois
I've already
Lane
made up my mind if we do.
And we can, but my argument just based is we already have Alfred as kind of the mentor character, and we have Stan Lee as the guy who appears in everything. And I think that's kind of 2 boxes that Nick Fury checks. And I think Margo Kidder is the perfect encapsulation of the love interest, which is a role that we don't have on our Mount Rushmore, and I think is an important role in superhero movies.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go. I was going with Margo Kidder. That performance, everyone kind of looks back on Christopher Reeve and Margo Kidder as that's Superman and Lois. And she's the quintessential love interest of a superhero that is also her own person. And and is not just the love interest. So I think that set that up. And I think just as more of iconic, like everyone knows who Lois Lane is. And a lot of that is because of the original Superman movie. So I'd go with that.
I agree with you guys. I changed my mind. I vote for Margo Kidder also.
Yeah, part of it
too. I think
that just covers a category that needs to be on the Mount Rushmore that we didn't have represented.
Yeah, we've also had like a lot of guys like with comic book movie performance that was 4 dudes, and then I also partially didn't want to have like another 4 dudes. So I was like,
yeah.
Okay, so here's a quick question, just briefly. What's the best performance by a female superhero? Because my vote would be Daphne Keane in Logan.
That's definitely it would be on the Rushmore.
Yeah, it's not our fault like that. It wasn't any women because it's not exactly the the genre. I think it comes down to if you really like Scarlett Johansson,
Pamela Anderson, and
Black
Barbara
Widow. There we go. That's it.
There you go.
I think Margot Robbie's really good as Harley Quinn.
Tank Girl.
She elevates bad movies.
No.
The girl who plays Katana.
Karen Fukuhara.
Yeah.
She's good in the boys.
Honestly, though, I would say if you count her, I would say Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, because she's kind of a hero, in that because she's a villain but really a hero in the stories that she's in.
Yeah, I get that. Those are the top choices. So, all right. So that being said, our consensus movie change up. Mount Rushmore of comic book movie side characters. Number 1, we have J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. We have Alfred, played by Michael Caine. We have all of Stan Lee's cameos. You got to have Stan Lee's face on a Mount Rushmore if you're talking about comic book movies. Otherwise, what the fuck are we doing here? And the greatest love interest in any comic book movie, Margo Kidder's Lois Lane from the original Superman movies. So I think that's a great consensus. I think that's a good list. You guys brought up some that I didn't think about. That's a fun one to do. So that brings us back to Joe for our final comic book movie category, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, movie itself, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
the most
comic book
important
movie.
one, the big one. We might have some disagreements on these.
I
Yeah.
think
I think
so.
we will.
That'll be interesting. I think this might be our most heated debate. So to start off with, I have the original Superman. I think it's the first big time superhero movie that without that if that movie fails or if that movie just never comes out, we're not here having this conversation because there are probably very few to no comic book movies that follow. I also put the original X-Men movie because it was kind of that first post 90s uh, movie that took itself relatively seriously. A lot of the comic book movies in the 90s were pretty much straight garbage. I think Batman Returns is like one of the few, if only like good 90s superhero movie. And then I also put the Avengers because it's the movie that made everyone want a movie universe. You know, whatever kind of movie you were making, everyone when that movie succeeded, everyone was like, "Oh, gotta have a movie universe." And then finally, I put The Dark Knight because it's a movie that made non-comic book movies fans have to take comic book movies seriously. It's the reason now that more than 5 movies are nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. So those are my 4.
All right, so I started this
Terrible,
off with
Joe.
saying with maybe this will be a heated discussion, but Joe and I agree on a few of these. So I have Superman the movie. Like Joe said, it was basically the first one that showed these can be a serious thing. I love the 60s Batman, but those were comedies. Those weren't meant to be these big budget movies. Superman came along and changed the game. I disagree that we wouldn't be sitting here talking today without Superman coming out because X-Men is my next one, and I think we wouldn't be sitting here talking about comic book movies if X-Men hadn't come out. That is the modern day influential superhero movie. The open the door to all of the films that we've gotten today. Um, and then I also have the Dark Knight because it's the best one. I mean, it's the one that should have been nominated for Best Picture. It's the one that won a bunch of Oscars or at least was nominated for them. I think overall that's just the best one. You have to throw that on the list. And that was the one that came out and people said maybe we should take these seriously now. That's the reason Black Panther got nominated for Best Picture. It's because of The Dark Knight. If that hadn't happened previously, you wouldn't have comic movies even being considered for that. And while I disagree with Joe about the first Avengers movie, I have the encapsulation of the entire franchise. I have Avengers End Game because that whole franchise is basically a cinematic TV show that every episode is a new movie. It's something that we've never seen before, and we've seen this fail. We've seen the years and years and years building to a finale fail, and that was with Star Wars. And Avengers Endgame nailed it. Maybe it's not your favorite of the franchise, but it nailed the ending. And I think that's such an important thing because when you talk about any series of television, most of them it's like, yeah, but they ruined the finale. Endgame is a great, finale. It kind of does everything you need it to do. And I think that makes it a little more iconic than the original Avengers, only because we had more iconic things come after it. And it all built to this. So I think that's the only tiebreaker basically I had between that and the original Avengers. But that was my first honorable mention was that. So that's what it came down to. So I had almost the same 4 as Joe. Bobby, is yours any different than ours?
Not much. I have 3 commonalities between your 2 lists. And so I won't go too much into the same ones, but I do have The Dark Knight. That's pretty obvious. I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. I've probably watched it more than any other comic book movie by far. I do have Superman the movie that Joe did mention. I do think that this did propel comic book movies
And me.
generationally. Did you have that one too? I thought you said you disagreed with him. So you had that too.
No.
He
I
disagrees that that's
yeah,
why
yeah.
we're sitting here. He said X-Men's why we're sitting here, but he still had it.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yes.
so Superman the movie back, in a day that they weren't taken seriously, and they, like I said before, we've gone through it, but that's very iconic at this point, especially the performances. I did go with Avengers End Game, like Johnny. I think the series finale, essentially, or at least mid-season finale, if they keep going for another 15 years, is important to nail, because if they don't do that, then the cinematic universe might kind of start to fall apart at that point. and I think they just propelled it more into the future, and they nailed that ending, especially with two iconic characters with Iron Man and Captain America. And then I know that X-Men kind of showed modern day that you can take comic books seriously, but I think the movie that took that and then was a smash success, critically, pop culturally, more than X-Men was the original Spider-Man movie, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. So I have that instead of X-Men, and I was going between the two, and I love both those movies, but like just living through it, Spider-Man made so much more of an impact around me and to people my age at the time and older. It showed me at the time it was just gritty enough and scary enough with some of the blood and stuff with Spider-Man that it can be taken seriously, but it was just goofy and silly enough to still be entertaining for a wide range of audiences. And I think that was an important kind of thing to show that kind of set the tone for what Marvel would become in the future.
I agree. I was debating between Spider-Man and X-Men. I went with X-Men because it came a few years before, but I seriously considered Blade. So I'm interested to see what Tristan says. I just don't think Blade had the comic book cultural impact.
No, a lot of people didn't know that was even a comic book.
People still don't know that's a comic book.
All right, I'll start out with the two that we have in common. I think these are the first time in the whole episode that we've had a common movie on all of our lists, and I think it's two actually, because I have Superman the movie. We talked about it ad nauseum already. It changed it didn't change the way it created the way we look at superhero movies today. Nothing was even done before it really. We had Superman the Moment, we had stuff like that, but this was like, okay, we're making a real movie this time. So I picked that. And The Dark Knight, we talked about it a lot already too, but this movie is good just as a movie. It doesn't have to be a comic book movie. It doesn't have to have all those caveats of like, oh, well, they're comic book characters. Oh, the director really meant this. Oh, the studio overstepped and did this. It just stands by itself as a great movie. And I think, like you guys said, it brought an audience into this that never would have watched otherwise. It really forced like the general audience to be like, okay, what are these comic book movies people are talking about? Let's go watch them. And it never really went back from there. So I have that. Now I'll get into my two that you guys don't have on your lists. And my first is Black Panther. I think it was a hugely groundbreaking movie. And I think we talked in the last topic about how we see a lot of homogenous kind of characters in these movies. We see a lot of white dudes, essentially. We see a lot of people who all kind of look the same and have similar backgrounds, similar kind of experiences. And I think Black Panther shows it's not just a token movie too. It's not just like, oh, here's like the black character. It's made by a black filmmaker starring black actors about like black issues. It very much doesn't just put them on stage as like performers. It lets them make the movie themselves. You know, it feels very much like a black superhero movie. And I think the diversity of that alone is something that we're going to see going forward and something that I think really broke new ground for the MCU, for superhero movies, for blockbusters, for all that kind of stuff. And my last one is a recent movie, one that also broke new ground, and one that I think also is going to change the way we watch movies. I think we're in this debate right now of will streaming movies work? Will they not work?
Oh, God, that's not what I wrote down what I thought you were going for.
And look, we finally gotten this. How many years of build-up? I think it's iconic. Whether you like it or not, look, we got to put the Snyder Cut on here. It's got to be in the discussion. It's got to be part of this because
God, no, it doesn't.
Nobody's talked about.
I thought you were going to go Spider-Verse.
Nobody has talked about a movie like talk about this movie maybe since The Dark Knight of like, oh, here's the director's vision on screen. What are we going to do? And I think this is going to really change the way we watch movies. It's really going to change the way we consume movies. Like I said, streaming is the debate right now, and this kind of showed that you can launch a movie on streaming and people will watch it. You don't have to put it out in the theater. You can put it out on streaming, and people are going to follow this too because there's a question going into like multiverse stuff. Are people going to be able to follow this like meta journey of like, oh, these characters from different universes, from different franchises, from different studios? And I think the meta narrative of this movie reached like the mainstream audiences in a way that I didn't think it would. So I think it just really, really set new ground for movies. Even if you hate it, it's a game changer.
All right, I will say I almost put Black Panther on my list instead of X-Men for a lot of the same reasons you did, but it was a toss-up, and I felt like X-Men, for a lot of what Johnny said, it was partially why we're sitting here. I had to put that one. But
yeah, and I do have to say,
X-Men pick, not so much with your Justice League pick.
Yeah, as much as like Tristan, I loved the Snyder Cut of Justice League, but as far as a Mount Rushmore, I would it's way too recent for me to even consider it, but also I don't want something to represent the Mount Rushmore to be something that came to be in kind of a toxic fashion in the way that it did. with a lot of the fans kind of bullying in that fashion. I am glad that it came out because I really do love the movie, but I don't want people to start thinking they can bully every studio into doing what they want going forward. So I don't want that to be the legacy of it.
I wouldn't even consider it as far as the impact that it's going to have on superhero films. I don't think it'd be in the top 10. I think maybe if Snyder, after this makes a whole universe and it succeeds, okay, but he seems to have just set up a bunch of things that aren't going to happen. I think Blade is a much better choice because that was like the first comic book movie that showed you can do adult comic book movies, and then X-Men built off that, but people don't know much about Blade, but I'd say that's way more monumental. I think we're going to look back in 10 years and be like, damn, Into the Spider-Verse really changed the game as far as what you can do with animated superhero movies. As you mentioned with Under the Red Hood, there are some really good like DC and some Marvel animated movies, but those are all like straight to DVD things. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse changed the game on that. Spider-Man 2 really showed that you can escalate these into really great films. Logan and Deadpool both showed that you can do superhero movies R-rated.
I was surprised no one had Logan.
Logan, I think it's there, but I think just if Deadpool had never come out, Logan maybe makes it. But I think those two kind of cancel each other out in a way.
Yeah.
Batman 66 is more monumental because that showed that you can make superhero movies. You know, even if they're comedies, you can put these into pop culture and make them work. And while I don't love the movie, Batman 89 was much more monumental because that showed that was the original, like, this is the dark superhero movie. You're used to Superman and these movies, you know, that are super bright and colorful, and we're going to make Batman and make it dark and make it cool. And then also Iron Man set up an entire franchise. So I think while Tristan loves the movie and like I could see his argument, I think it just fails in comparison to probably 10 other movies that you could make the same argument for and then have actually shown the track record of doing so. We just don't know what actually changes.
That's what's exciting for me, though. This is going to be. This is something that we're going to look back on and be like, "What was this a turning point? What did they do to the industry?"
It could be, but I just don't know if it will be because I don't know if DC even continues with anything Zack Snyder after this. Like, you know, maybe they do. Maybe this changes things and Zack Snyder becomes the Kevin Feige and they go with, you know, Snyder being the guy that they originally intended to be because this movie succeeded, but we don't know yet, and it doesn't look like that is the case. So we'll see. I mean, maybe in 10 years that we talked about this, maybe even though I don't love the movie, we talk about it as like, this really changed the game for DC. They got their shit together after this, but I don't see that happening. I don't see this doing that.
And honestly, I think, again, it could have a really big impact. And it could be a few different reasons. It could be with DC if they do continue with Snyder, but it also could be streaming, like you said, Tristan. Like, okay, well, we're gonna let because you don't have to sit in a theater, people make 4.5, 3.5 hour movies and just play it out in that way because people will sit at home and take breaks. And like, if that starts to happen and this is like the cause of it, maybe. But right now, we just don't know what's gonna come from this.
I think if you're going to talk about the streaming thing, you have to talk about WandaVision and you have to talk about the Netflix
like 5 minutes
Marvel
on a movie
shows.
That's like not going to make our list. So.
Yeah,
I know.
Definitely. But
it's recent. It's a recent relevant conversation.
I think if we're gonna throw up a team movie, it's got to be Endgame. I think we're kind of split on the Avengers movies, whether it's Avengers or whether it's Endgame.
Like
and I think Endgame is like the monumental movie.
Yeah,
I think so too.
I was like 50-50 on which one to include, and I just kind of wrote down Avengers, so I'm perfectly fine with Endgame being the one instead of Avengers.
All right, so I think now we have like 3 of them that are locks. We have The Dark Knight, Superman, and Endgame.
Yep. So our 4th lock, I would say, is either X-Men, because 2 of us I think had that.
Yeah, I had X-Men.
Or maybe 3 of us. Did Tristan have X-Men?
I didn't have it.
Okay, so 2 of us had X-Men. So I think it comes down to X-Men, Spider-Man, which was a couple of years later, but it, you know, helped set up the universe like Bobby said, or Black Panther, because that was such a monumental film that looks way different than anything we've seen before, brings the diversity, had such an impact on the Black community, and really, like, you saw the impact that Black Panther had when it came out, and then you saw it tenfold when Chadwick Boseman passed away. So I could see the argument. Black Panther was in my honorable mentions. That one was one that I really, really considered. I went with X-Men just because I feel like that actually set up the genre that led to Black Panther coming out. Maybe you don't have a Black Panther without X-Men, but if we look at this in 5 years and 6 years and you have more diverse characters coming out, you could easily say, we don't have this character without Black Panther. So it's tough. It's more recent, but I think that is really the debate. I think, first of all, are we going with Spider-Man or X-Men? Tristan, if you had to decide between those two, what would you go with?
I would go with Spider-Man. I have similar memories to Bobby of my childhood. Just that was the movie to talk about, so I'd go for Spider-Man.
I could see it. I think X-Men, while being the first, maybe Spider-Man had the bigger cultural impact. Joe, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I already have my final vote of the three of where I would go, and I'm switching my vote from
Me too.
X-Men.
And I'm switching
Okay,
my
so
Spider-Man.
Joe.
Oh, you're switching to Spider-Man because I'm switching to Black Panther.
I'm switching from Spider-Man to Black Panther. So we are already three of us there.
I'm switching to Black Panther. I talked myself into it.
Yeah, I like Black Panther too. It's like you guys said, we don't really know the impact of something like Snyder Cut, but I think we've already seen the impact of Black Panther on movies, so that's
definitely.
And I think like it when it comes to picking like maybe the last one it's coming down to, like as far as my list goes, like Spider-Man, it was very monumental to me, but Black Panther was monumental to a ton of people, and I think completes our 4 really well. So I think that we represent.
I agree.
Yeah.
So that makes our movie change-up consensus for top comic book movie films: The Dark Knight, Avengers End Game, Superman the movie, and Black Panther. I think that's a super solid 4. I think you can't do much better than that. I think that's a great list. So
not enough Snyder Cut on there, but it's good.
No Snyder Cut, but maybe it changes things for studios. We don't know the impact exactly going forward, but whatever, we'll see.
We're an hour.
So does that
all right, so that leads us to
stuff, right?
Our comic book stuff is done.
Yeah, we're an hour 23 in, and based on how long everything's taken us, I think we've got time for 2 of our next 3 topics. So if we want to just keep moving down the list, or if we want to pick which one we just want to push for next week, we can do that too.
I would vote for, if I had to pick a category next, I would either go fight scene or I would go for movie character theme song, because that's different than anything we've done.
Yeah.
So I would say theme song, and I'm going to step away really quick, but that's my vote.
Okay.
All right. So
double up on theme song.
And then because we have time, I think, for 2. So did we want to do fight scene or creature and animal? Because I'm fine with you.
I think let's go fight scene, and then we'll do creature and animal if we have time.
All right, yeah. So creature and animal was the last one anyway. So we'll just keep moving down the list. We'll do character music next, and then fight scene. So we waiting for Bobby to come back, or can he hear us?
We don't really need Bobby to come back because we're going to. I think I'm going first. You did your superhero movies first, so I'll do mine. Bobby should be back by then, but we'll take a second real quick because I'll write down.
This was a hard one for me too, because I think you don't think about it, but when you start looking into character themes, there's a lot that I think I just kind of overlooked. And it's hard because you don't want to include all John Williams either.
This was actually one that I looked at and I thought of 4, and I think I think my 4, it's going to be really hard for someone to convince me otherwise. I think the 4 that I have are the most iconic 4, and I don't think anyone else can really compete with it. But I only thought of 4. I thought of a couple others that didn't make it, so I'd be interested to see what you guys do. Maybe I didn't think of one that changes my mind, but for the most part, I'm going to give you my 4, and I think these are the Mount Rushmore. I would fight for all 4 of these. So 1, I have the Superman theme from the 78. How can you not? Dun, 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 dun. Like, that is so iconic. It's something that they brought back to the franchise, essentially. You can't really argue with it. The next one, when I think character theme, it's as soon as that hits, you think of the character. And to me, that's the Rocky theme. The Rocky theme, it's brought back to the Creed franchise. It gets you pumped up as soon as you think of it. You just picture Rocky as soon as you hear it. My third is the Imperial March, specifically for Darth Vader. That's another one. When I hear the Imperial March, I think Vader. Whenever it shows him on screen, it plays that, and it's super iconic. Again, it's John Williams, and it's brilliant. It's just some of the best music ever put to screen, and it really personifies the character. And my fourth, which will make the list because I refuse to let anyone else say that it's a more iconic theme, it's the fucking James Bond theme. When you hear that, you know the character. Even if you don't know the franchise, you know what it's from. You know who the character is. It's maybe the best score ever written for a character. It was the original music for Dr. No, and it was so good that they left it for the rest of the franchise. It opens every movie, any James Bond movie. As soon as he uses the gadget or gets out of a situation, cue the theme. It's in every single film. It's super iconic, and it's brilliant, and it's just incredible. So I think those are the four, and it's going to be hard to fight me on anything replacing those, but I'm interested to see what you guys have. So, Bobby, what are your four?
Terrible list, Johnny. Absolutely
garbage list.
But I will have to say, there is a theme of yours that I love, and I had on my list, and I had to get rid of it to represent a different genre. So I'm going to start with the most obvious one and the first one I put down, and the one that Johnny put up the biggest defense for. And as a guitar player, it's just amazingly fun to play, and that is the James Bond theme. It's so fun. It's so well done. You know exactly what character it is. When that theme comes on, you know what movie you're watching. You know the tone of it, basically by the way it's used. I think it's a perfect theme for a spy. I think it just encapsulates James Bond. The next one is definitely the Superman theme. John Williams does it again. He has created some of the best themes to movies ever. Jurassic Park, one of my favorite movies, one of the best scores ever to me. He did the Harry Potter theme, even though he didn't do the rest of the movies. I mean, he's done so many, but Superman is so iconic to the character. It's one of the things that people loved hearing in the original Justice League cut in 2017, where moments and some hints of that score in there. And I also have Rocky, the Gonna Fly Now theme. It's Rocky, even though it's been used now for Creed as well. It's basically a Rocky character theme, and it's iconic. Everyone knows what it is. It pumps you up, gets you wanting to work out, run up some steps. It's just a great theme. And the next one, I removed the Imperial March because everyone now thinks of it as Star Wars instead of Vader personally, but it was close. That one was on there. But what I replaced it with is to represent the horror genre, and that is the Halloween Michael Myers theme.
That's a good
because that you hear that, it's the most iconic horror theme of all time, and you know exactly what it is. It's Halloween, it is Michael Myers, and someone's going to kill you.
Hey, I said someone's going to have to come up with a good one to make me, kind of change my argument. That's a great one. I didn't consider that, but yeah that's fantastic. That one, like, it's just so fast. It's so creepy. That's brilliant. That's a really, really, really good choice.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you know how much I love Star Wars, so it was hard to replace the Imperial March. But
yeah, I was surprised that was the one that didn't make your list. But as soon as you said your fourth, I was like, okay, makes sense. I won't argue with that.
All right, Tristan.
It was a hard one for me. I want to mention earlier that every time I thought of a good character theme, I'd be like, oh, that was great. I look it up and be like, oh, wait, that was a TV show theme. Like, I was thinking of the Batman 66 theme, which I guess might have been in the movie, but it's much more known for the TV show. I was thinking of the Scooby-Doo theme, which is like one of the greatest opening themes. If we were doing TV themes, I feel like that would be a fun debate. But I'll start out with repeating some of the stuff we've mentioned before. In theme of the episode, I want to start with Superman theme from 1978. John Williams is the king of making character themes, and I think this is the iconic one. There's so many different ways this theme can be used to elicit hope, to elicit fear, to elicit sadness. It's like such an incredible range of what this one couple different motifs in this theme can be. And like you said, it's come back all the way back in the 2017 Justice League. Even though I hate the score of that movie overall, I think the reuse of that theme was pretty interesting. So I think that just shows its relevance. And Johnny mentioned it, Bobby mentioned it. I think the James Bond theme. How do you get more iconic than this? I'm not even a James Bond fan. I've seen a handful of the movies, but that theme is instantly playing in my head. As soon as I think character theme, I start hearing that song. I think of Casino Royale, the last scene of Casino Royale when he comes out and he finally says the line, "Oh, I'm Bond." James Bond, then you cut the credits and the music plays. That's like one of the most hyped things I ever experienced. It was my first time watching a James Bond movie, and even just in the first time watch, it still hit me.
Yeah, after taking out someone in the ankles, but with a machine gun, it's pretty badass.
Pretty Bond move, you know. I have one that got mentioned earlier. Oh, you know what? I'll start with Bobby's crossover pick. I have Michael Myers from Halloween. I think if you want to do a horror representation, that is the horror theme. I thought about Jaws too, but I think that this is so unanimously associated with this character, and we've seen it come back time and time again throughout the decades comparatively to other themes. And even, I don't remember when the last Halloween came out. It was a couple of years ago. COVID has, destroyed my sense of time, how far away things are from now. But even in that, John Carpenter and his son made a new version of this theme, and just in that version of the theme, you can still hear like the terror of that character. All you hear is the first couple of beats, and you're ready to run. And my one pick that was on anybody's list, it got mentioned by Bobby a little bit, is the theme from Harry Potter. Technically Hedwig's theme, but I think it's associated with Harry very much so. The da-na-na-na-na-na-na. I think that's like very, very much iconic John Williams, and I think it came out in 2001, so I wanted to get sort of that like turn of the century, like launch of a franchise kind of thing. So I think Harry Potter, especially to me, is such a relevance to my childhood. I think that's a theme that I've heard played so many times over in my life. Yeah, we've got some more Harry Potter representation on Johnny's shirt here. So I think Harry Potter is one that we could argue into that list. So those are my four: Superman, Harry Potter, James Bond, and Michael Myers.
All right.
All right.
So I'll just
Joe,
kind of skim over the ones we've talked
least.
about before. I've got your James Bond theme, iconic. Got the Superman theme, again, John Williams, super iconic. Best like superhero theme. Then I have the Rocky theme, obviously. It's classic. It's iconic. No one has ever worked out without listening to the Rocky theme. You're tired, you're exhausted, you're ready to give up. You throw on the Rocky theme, and you got another 4 hours of working out left in you. And my final one was mentioned, but no one else has picked it. And it's 2 notes, and it represents that song is what people think of when they think of this character more than even the visualization of the character, and that's the Jaws theme. Like when you think of the shark in Jaws, you don't think of the shark. You think of the character's theme song. And so that is why I went with the character's theme in Jaws. Or the shark's theme in Jaws.
See, Jaws is my favorite movie of all time, but I didn't go with Jaws because that makes me think more so of the movie than like Bruce the Shark. Like, I think there are plenty of scenes in that movie. Yes, you have the opening of the shark, attacking the girl. But outside of that, like when the shark appears on the boat, like, oh, you're going to need a bigger boat and stuff. You don't have the Jaws theme playing, so it's not like something that
does when the shark goes through the water, and every time, basically, when they couldn't show the shark.
When it shows the water, it does, but I don't think necessarily that's like, I picture that more of the score of the film than like a character's theme. That's my only argument why it didn't make my list, but I think it's probably my favorite score of all time. I love that. It's brilliant. But I personally think more of the film than like the shark. But I mean, you also think of the shark attack. So, I could see it for sure. But it's tough to be like, yeah, the character of the shark rather than like characters that are maybe more iconic that are other things represent.
Yeah, that was just barely outside. Like I thought of the Jaws theme, but again, I did think of it more of a score to the movie and maybe something that would insinuate a shark attack rather than a character theme. But it's still great. Like I love the Jaws theme, but I don't think I'd replace anything on my list for it.
And I think too that's my argument with Harry Potter. I think that's more of the score of the franchise, and like I don't hear that and think, oh, Harry's like entering a scene. And I think that our other ones are, you have a Rocky moment, it plays the score. You hear there's a James Bond moment, it plays the score. You have, the Superman theme, like whenever he saves someone or is flying, or you really picture him. And that is why I went with the Imperial March for Vader, because when he enters the screen and he's coming in, you have that Imperial March playing. So that really makes me think of that character. But I do agree with Bobby that maybe that's just more people hear that and think Star Wars and less of Vader. So honestly, my 4th vote would be for the Halloween theme, because when I hear that, I think Michael Myers.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, if I were to merge our votes together, I think my list for us would be Superman, Halloween, Bond, and Rocky. I think those are all on your guys' list. And I love
Yeah.
Harry Potter, but I'd be perfectly happy replacing it with Rocky. That's like an instantly iconic hype song.
I'd be
Yeah,
perfectly happy
I
with
think.
that because that means that the music guy on the show gets all 4 themes
Yeah, and
on
I
the
would
list.
say the Imperial
Which
March
makes sense.
started off not as Vader's theme, and it slowly throughout the franchise became Vader's theme because there's points in the
Yeah.
franchise where Vader's like not even involved, but it gets darker and they play, the Imperial March.
And I think
Yeah.
Star Wars is hard too because the sequel trilogy like just ruined all the iconography of the music. Like they just play the songs whenever they feel like it, and it's like, oh, a bad guy's on screen, let's play the Imperial March, or like, oh, something cool is happening, let's play the Princess and the Scoundrel song from Empire, and it's just like they've completely disassociated them with the characters, and I
Yeah.
think that kind
Yeah.
of weakens Imperial March and stuff like that.
The only thing
I
is,
agree.
yeah, like I agree with the general idea for that. And again, I didn't have Imperial March on my list, but the Imperial March is actually the only thing score-wise that they only did include in the sequel franchise when it was showing Vader's helmet. Very slow. They didn't use it any other
Yeah.
time. They
Did
created
they
a
did
Kylo
they use
theme.
it? They didn't use it in Rogue One at all, did they? Like
They
during
did like
the
a hint of it
Mustafar scene?
when at the end when the Leia's ship gets away. There's like a
Yeah.
small hint of it.
But it's not the entire theme. It's just
No,
like,
it, like,
oh,
cuts
here's a
off.
couple notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
And we
Makes
But
sense.
still-
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought going in the Imperial March was a home run, but as soon as I heard Halloween, I was like, that's better. I didn't think of it, but as soon as you said it, it's something. As soon as you say it, you picture the song. As soon as you hear the song, you picture the character. I agree. So that leaves the definitive top 4 character theme songs for our Mount Rushmore as the James Bond theme. Shout out to Monty Norman and John Barry who arranged that. Halloween was John Carpenter, and then the Rocky theme. I don't have that
Bill Conti.
down.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and then
Was that a song original to the movie, or did they like take that from another source and
No, I
use
think
it
that
again?
was original.
No, that was
No,
original.
that was original to the movie. The one that they obviously took from something else was "Eye of the Tiger," which was the other thing that you could probably, as soon as you hear that song, you
Well,
think Rocky.
that was it was written for the movie,
Yeah,
but that was not. That was for
Oh
Rocky.
yeah, but it was
3.
for 3 or 4.
No, it was,
Three, I
it was
think.
written for the movie it's in because
Yeah.
they got the song because Apollo Creed
Mhm.
says to Rocky that you've lost the
Yeah.
you need the
Yeah,
eye
yeah.
of the tiger if you're going to beat Clubber Lang.
You're right.
Yep.
But that's not necessarily his theme, even though that's another Rocky has probably 2 songs that you hear and immediately think of that character, which is awesome. And then the Superman theme by John Williams, of course. That's the most iconic, I think. So that's a great top 4. The Halloween theme was a brilliant choice, so I'm glad you two both thought of that. Or 3, I forget.
I didn't have it. I had
didn't have it,
Jaws
so
instead.
you two both did.
Joe has bad
Alright.
taste. What do you?
Okay.
Yeah, what are we talking about? So that leaves us. We have one more category possibly, but I think we might have time for 2 more. We do 10 minutes a category. We could get to a nice
Yeah, if we speed
clean
through
2
it.
hours. So
We
let's
have
let's
some
go
live
to
comments, but
let's go to live comments. Let's see what they have to say, Joe, and then
Mason-
we'll go to our next category.
Spinner 58 brought up before that. I brought up the Jaws theme. Like, what about the Jaws shark theme? And then Mason, who's been on our main show, and he also appeared on our Suicide Squad
I'm
live
scared.
drink along. That if you haven't watched our drink alongs and you like shitty movies, go watch some of the shitty movies you watched and drink with us. Those are
I barely remember them because I've been drinking a lot during those.
You were
long-
so gone, Tristan.
yeah, it was fun.
Tristan was hammered at the end of the first drink along of the day, and then you guys did 2 more.
And then we did 2 more. But yeah, Mason said, well, if it isn't a bunch of people scared to face the only undefeated champion in movie change-up history. And then he also said, I'm thinking Indiana Jones, Darth Vader, Rocky, and Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow was a honorable mention for me. And then he also said honorable mention to Lars' theme from Lars and the Real Girl. So,
Yeah, no, that's a great one. Yeah, that's why Mason will get crushed as soon as he faces a real competitor.
Indy's
Mason,
good,
I
but
challenge you.
yeah.
I will crush you. I will win 7-0 if we face. Will not be close. Face
Yeah,
me, you
I do
coward.
have to say the Indiana Jones theme is fantastic, and I love the theme. But again, I do think
Yeah,
of the
that's a really good
movies
one.
and adventure
Yeah.
and stuff like
Mhm.
more than I do
Yeah.
Indy himself. But I mean, it's a great theme. John Williams again. So
All right.
Yeah, Williams has a ton. You could just go through his filmography and just pick some, and you'd be like, all right, well, like, but he has a lot that are okay. The Jurassic Park theme, but that's not specifically to a character. So
Yep.
I think when you narrow it down to character, you get, I think the ones we chose are a solid 4. So Bobby, that leads us to fight scene, movie fight scene, not comic book, any movie
Yep.
in history. What are we going with? I'm excited for this
So-
category.
This was a really tough one for me because there are so many scenes, and there's a lot of scenes that I love, but I don't think should necessarily make around Mount Rushmore. But I did include one of them that I love that I probably won't end up making it, but I think is one of my favorites. The first one I have is from a movie that Johnny knows well, and Joe, I think, but it's the kitchen scene in The Raid 2. I needed to include something from the Raid franchise or from this genre in general. I mean, it's amazing. It changed the way choreography is done. It inspired John Wick and how a lot of action scenes are shot now. And I think that's probably the best one to me in that franchise. So I have that. I also have, just for its iconography and what it did to pop culture and probably inspired people like Zack Snyder, I have the Matrix scene, the Matrix fight scene on the rooftop with him dodging bullets. It's not my favorite scene to watch now, but it was so iconic, and it's been memed and mimicked and to death in pop culture, and inspired a whole genre of filmmakers. So I have that. I'm including someone who is probably the best stunt man actor of all time, which is Jackie Chan. And I have his fight in Legend of the Drunken Master, which is, one, it's a great fight scene, great wire work. It's also hilarious too. It's funny. That's included in the fight scene. So that's why I chose that one. And then the last one, just personally, it's been mentioned on the show earlier in the comic book discussion, and that is the church fight scene in Kingsman. For a genre like comic book movies, it's shocking. It's killing, people that are despicable people, but they didn't necessarily do anything to our lead character, and he just slaughters them in a really fun but disturbing scene. So I included that. It's probably not going to end up making the list, but that was definitely a personal choice. But those are my 4.
All right. Tristan, what are your 4 Mount Rushmore picks?
I have 4 that haven't been mentioned yet, and one that is definitely a personal take that I don't think has a spot on the list, but I'll fight for it. My first is a very iconic franchise fight, which is Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker in The Empire Strikes Back. I think there's so many shots in that just ring throughout history. Like when he first ignites his lightsaber in the sand there, and kind of like the clouds of this interior room, and they're just kind of looking at each other, and that's just like such an iconic moment, and it has such implications of just themes and characters building up to this moment. Over 2 whole movies, you're waiting for these 2 characters to finally have their 1v1. And I also think it's a big move to have Luke just get pretty much wrecked, not just in his battle, but in his morals. Like when Vader goes and tells him, "Oh, I am your father," that just morally crushes the hero of the story and leaves him at like the lowest point it can be left at going into the finale of the trilogy. So I think that has tons of iconography, tons of thematic relevancy. I just think it's a great one. My next pick is also from a franchise. It's one that got brought up earlier in the episode. It's the Avengers versus Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. And it's the scene essentially where it ends with the snap. I think that big fight scene, especially the one with Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Man, and Iron Man fighting off with Thanos. I remember sitting at Comic-Con, I don't know how many years ago this was now, where that was the first kind of trailer they showed for Infinity War. And they were like, we don't have much shot, but we had like a couple scenes. And the one couple scenes they had done was Thanos versus the Avengers. And they showed us a bunch of that scene. So I got to see that and kind of get very hyped going into the Infinity War. And plus, you mentioned it too, the heroes losing that one. It's a big risk in the MCU to have the heroes be left on this cliffhanger loss moment. So I think that is on my pick for fight scenes. My next is an animated fight scene. I think I wanted to represent like Disney kids kind of fight scenes that I think are underrepresented in these discussions. And my pick is Scar versus Simba from The Lion King. I think there's some really cool shots in that. And I remember as a kid watching that and thinking this was like the most epic thing I've ever seen. And I think to represent a genre we don't necessarily get on the movie on these discussions, we talked about comic book movies all day, but I think kid movies are something that we like to shrug off a lot. Is like, oh, that's just a kids movie. And I think Lion King was so much more than just a kids movie, and it's because of scenes like this that it's lasted so many decades later. And my last one is a bit of a curveball pick. I wanted to, similar to Bobby, represent a fight that's kind of funny and shows like comedy in fight scenes. So my pick for this is Borat fighting Azamat from the first Borat movie. They have this big naked brawl in their hotel room that spirals out into this kind of like meeting going on in the hotel, some kind of conference, and you get all these unexpected people who are seeing them fight. It's Sacha Baron Cohen and some very large actor, and they're naked fighting in the middle of this conference. And I remember the shock value of that scene before the movie came out. People were like, "Oh my god, you got to see Borat for this naked wrestling scene. Did you hear what they did in this movie?" And I think that wasn't just funny and outlandish, but it had like a cultural impact. People were always talking about that one scene from Borat, and I remember when the sequel came out like last year, people were like, "Oh, how are they going to top that naked wrestling scene?" So I think the scene is still relevant, and it was talked about a lot in 2006, 2005 when this movie came out. So that's my pick for a comedy fight scene.
All right. So I'll go. These are my 4 picks for my Mount Rushmore of fight scenes. My first one, I chose the final match in Warrior because I thought it was an interesting dynamic that someone, you could be sitting next to someone and they could be rooting for the other person and not the same person you're rooting for. I think most people would root for Joel Edgerton's Brendan, but I could easily see someone rooting for Tom Hardy's Tommy. So I wanted to go with that fight, and I think it's one of the more interesting and well shot and well directed and like best choreographed fights from like a sports movie, and then it's not just like 2 guys like trying to actually kill each other. I chose from Avengers End Game the final like fight with Thanos because I think it's the best fight with just like massive groups of people with like hundreds of people fighting each other. From Old Boy, I chose the kind of like hallway hammer fight because especially on like Netflix shows and all these other things, all of these fights have included these hallway kind of action fight scenes. And then finally, I'm not exactly sure what I chose because I just put The Raid and then I put, I don't know, whatever scene Johnny picked. So that is my final selection.
All right, so here are my 4, and I think this is a category that I was most excited for. This is something that I chose for Mount Rushmores. Joe mentioned whatever scene I choose from The Raid. While they're amazing ones, I think the prison riot in the yard is maybe my favorite, but I think the best overall in terms of choreography, in terms of the score, going from slow to fast and really building up and really, really going along with the fight, is the kitchen fight in The Raid 2. That scene's brilliant. A great fight scene is all about choreography. It's like a brilliant dance put to screen, and when you have people that have clearly worked on this over and over, it looks so real. You have it start off slow, the music builds up, the fight gets faster, the fight gets more intense, the stakes get higher. That kitchen fight in The Raid 2 is brilliant. It's the best fight scene I think ever put to screen. And my second favorite fight scene ever is the Old Boy hammer fight in the hallway. One shot. It's choreography. It looks brilliant. You have Mintic Choi with the knife in his back, and then he just leaves it there the rest of the fight. And then it ends brilliantly with the elevator opening, and it's another like wave of guys. And it's just like everything about that scene is so brilliant. It's probably the best choreography ever put to screen in terms of any stunt scene or fight scene ever. And then my other 2 are a little off the board in terms of what we've said so far. But I don't think you can talk about the best fight scenes ever without mentioning the Bride versus the Crazy 88 from Kill Bill. That scene is phenomenal. You have all sorts of different fighting. You have all sorts of different weaponry. You have one person against a big crowd of people, which is huge for a fight scene. There are plenty of good one-on-one ones, like I talked about with the Raid 2, but in Kill Bill, Quentin Tarantino just shoots that beautifully. That scene, again, it's all about choreography, and you watch that scene, it's perfect. It's someone drops something and it gets used later in the fight. Everything has you have the act and you have the reaction and you have the impact of anything that happens. I think that's what makes a really good fight scene. And then my 4th one, I was really debating on a couple here. A few. I'll go over some of mine because they weren't mentioned. They're not going to make it, but in Ip Man. You have him versus the 10 black belts. That's a fantastic scene. It's another one of one guy versus a bunch. They're all in an arena. It's a very old school martial arts one. It's great. You have Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris in The Way of the Fist. You have even like a cute little cat that it cuts to. But that scene is great. And it literally takes place in the fucking Coliseum at Rome. Like that scene really builds up and is great. And you have two of the most legendary Kung Fu masters ever fighting each other. And then you have, I agree with Tristan that Star Wars should be represented, but I have two honorable mentions from it. I don't have the one he chose because that's just a boring fight. While it's iconic, it's not a good fight. I have the Darth Maul fight. I think it's fantastic, and I think the Anakin versus Obi-Wan fight is great. So those are the two I had honorable mentions for. But my final one, if anyone has ever seen Eastern Promises starring Viggo Mortensen, you have the bathhouse fight. And it's crazy because he's fully naked. You see him flopping around the whole fight, but it's so violent and it's so good. You have two assassins that come in to attack Viggo in this bathhouse, and it's just something that I've never seen before. You have someone fully naked, not expecting a fight. Two guys come in with knives. You have really great kills. You have him lowering the guy's head onto the knife. And it's super violent, but it's super great choreography. Again, in that one, the knife falls, it's being used later. You have a lot of good stunt work. It's great choreography. And it's probably the most memorable scene I've ever seen in any movie because it's just visceral. Like you can't not, you want to turn your head away, but you can't. It's similar to the Borat fight because it's two naked guys fighting, but it's a legitimate fight scene with good choreography. It kind of takes that and makes it serious, and it's wild that it works. Like it shouldn't work. Like in the idea of a fully naked man fighting, like you take that Borat fight and then you basically make it into a raid fight. That shouldn't work. But if you look back at the film, it's brilliant and it's done so well. And good for Viggo. You know, guy can fight naked and show what he's got in more ways than one. So good for Viggo.
Apparently, you killed
Tristan. Can you see the Twitch live chat right now? Is that what you're laughing at? Or no? Because Mason came in with a pretty great comment. He just said, "Be right back. Going to watch Aragorn's bratwurst slap into some dudes."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I got the Twitch open right here, so I was, while you were going, losing my mind with that comment. But honestly, with this category, I was like, okay, I'm living up to Johnny. I think Johnny knows fight scenes more than I do. I'll just pick the ones I like. But I do think that Star Wars deserves representation on the list. I think Star Wars has so many good fights, and I think you might not think the fight with Vader and Luke is necessarily great, but I think it has tons of iconography and tons of big moments that Star Wars leans on even now. So I feel like if you're going to represent Star Wars, you got to go with the most iconic.
I think you can. I think it's iconic, but if you watch the fight, it's two slow-moving people kind of slowly moving their swords. And I think if you're going to go Star Wars, I think you have to go either the Darth Maul fight because the choreography in that is brilliant. It looks great. It makes that entire movie worth watching. Or you go with the more emotional impact of the Anakin versus Obi-Wan. Some of that is a little too much choreography for me because you have them both spinning their lightsabers and then having to hit. It's not a very realistic one. I think personally Darth Vader fight is my favorite of the entire franchise. I mean Darth Maul. Sorry, Darth Maul.
Yeah,
fight.
Maul over the Obi-Wan and Anakin. I honestly am like Revenge of the Sith is probably the best prequel, but that fight is just a little too much, like Johnny said, choreography to me. I don't feel a lot of that emotion. So if we're going to go Star Wars and it's not, because I would pick over that, I actually would go the Vader Luke just for the emotional impact. But as far as actually the fight, like the choreography and the fight itself, it's Darth Maul. I mean, for sure.
I think there are plenty of great iconic fight scenes. Like the reason I didn't put Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris is because you look at it and you think of film and it's just elevated so much more as far as fight scenes and making it look realistic. I think that is a problem with Empire. That's my favorite Star Wars movie, but nothing in that fight ever is like, oh man, that's a cool thing that they just did.
It's
like,
shot really well. The
well,
cinematography is beautiful, but it's not.
If you look at it, there's nothing more than two people slowly swinging their lightsabers, and I think
wildly.
they did it much better. I think if you look at even just the not so choreographed, so like lightsaber fight, they did it better. It's not as iconic, but they do it much better with John Boyega um, having the lightsaber in The Force Awakens, kind of just swinging the lightsaber, but you have like a realistic opponent, and I think that scene is maybe better for what they were going for action wise. I agree that it's not as iconic at all as Empire, but I think overall for Star Wars, if we wanted to go with it, I think it's Darth Maul. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
You're the Star Wars guy.
if I were to rank them, I think the Maul fight and the kind of Anakin Obi-Wan fight are like neck and neck, and I would say the Maul fight maybe slightly gets the edge. But yeah, the Empire fight, it's like the emotion and the story around it's better. But if we're talking the fight is like all of the original trilogy fights are pretty weak.
Right. That's why I strayed away from some of the Rocky fights where you could have him versus Apollo Creed, but if you look back on it, it's not a very well shot actual fight, even if the emotion is there. I do want to go with movies that really nailed the choreography, really nailed the stunt work, and I think stunt people don't get enough credit in the industry, and I think that this is the opportunity to kind of do that for people that can excel at that. The other one that I really wanted to mention too was the John Wick, like the dubstep fight in the nightclub is really well shot. It's more like gun kills, but that's a really
I thought about that one too.
Yeah, me too. I thought of that.
Great one.
That was an honorable mention for me.
So overall, I think because the only ones we really had commonality on, I think the two that would definitely make the consensus are the Raid 2 Kitchens fight, and because Joe basically had that, Bobby had that, and I had that. The Old Boy Hammer fight, I think, is arguably the greatest fight scene ever put to screen, and two of us had that. And then it comes down to, do you guys agree? You've all seen Kill Bill. Do you agree with the Bride versus the Crazy 88? So I think that scene is super iconic.
Yeah, I love that scene. That almost made the cut. So I feel like if I was gonna do 5, that'd be my 5th one. So I vote for that.
My only thing as far as like a Mount Rushmore is that like Mount Rushmore wise, is that basically too similar to the kitchen fight where it's kind of the same thing only different? Or is that...
I don't think so, because if you look at the genres, you have one that's hand to hand with like a couple. Obviously, he's got like the under knives, like the Velociraptor claws, I like to call them. But I think as far as like if you look at all samurai movies, you could go back to a Kurosawa thing, but that's kind of what I talked about with Empire. If you look back at Kurosawa films, they're not shot as well as fight scenes today, and they kind of nail it. In Kill Bill, you have a lot of visceral action.
My only argument, and you guys can shoot it down, but if we're gonna go with fight scenes, like those are probably the best choreographed scenes. But the Matrix scene of the dodging bullets in that fight was more culturally impactful, and it inspired a genre of American filmmaking, so it's at least in the conversation to me.
But my question for that one is, you mentioned a rooftop scene, but when I think of the Matrix fight scene, I think of the subway scene.
Yeah,
I don't even think you chose the most iconic scene from the movie.
Well, either way, but if you the Matrix in general, I would say. But the reason I said that is because of the dodging bullets, which is what everyone pictures, which is part of
my only issue for that one is, I think it was executed well for that film, and I do think it was influential, but I think it was influential in a negative way. I think every movie going forward tried to do that, and they all failed at it. I think if you look at even films like Daredevil, try to do him dodging the glass.
Well,
there are a lot of really poor examples, and I think if you're looking at influential films, I think if you look at like the choreography, ones that have kind of sparked more influential fights, I think, are better than one that kind of just ruined the genre for a few years.
Okay, I wanted to bring it up because it did. I want to bring it up because it was just such a cultural thing, and it's still out. So that's all.
Yeah, it reminds me of a live comment we got earlier when Bobby was giving his explanation. He was talking about it inspired Zack Snyder, and Mason said, "Is inspiring Zack Snyder a positive thing?"
It inspired a lot of things, and only very few were done well, but it was like everyone tried to emulate that. Yeah, pretty much for a long time.
So we do need one more spot.
So what do we have?
I have the Eastern Promises scene because I think that's a great scene, but going against what I said, I don't know if that was super influential. You don't really see a lot like that again. You could argue that like maybe the bathroom scene in the latest Mission Impossible or the bathroom scene, even in like the Bourne series, maybe took from that but made it more PG-13, obviously, because you don't have Tom Cruise's sausage flapping around, as Mason would say. But I think that's a great scene. I think, though, the last scene should go to the Star Wars thing.
Yeah, I feel like, okay, yeah, I was going to say we need something different. Like, if we all have kind of like the samurai, Eastern, kind of like Asian-inspired fights, we should do something different. Granted, like, you could argue that the Star Wars fights are inspired by, like, Kurosawa movies and, like, samurai movies, but it's still different.
They are, but I think just like the Kurosawa, they've kind of updated it and made them better. And my vote for the final one might be the Darth Maul fight.
Yeah,
so,
I'm okay with that. I just wanted something
I'd
different.
be up with that.
Yeah, I like the Darth Maul scene.
I like that as it's a lot. It's very different than anything we have, and it's like,
and
again,
it's
like,
from an iconic franchise.
Iconic,
something
yeah.
that sparked, like, I don't think you have the Obi-Wan versus Anakin fight if you don't have the Darth Maul fight. You know, like, that sparked just this is what we can do now with lightsaber fights. It's so different and unique than anything they did in the original trilogy, and that was maybe the only original new thing that they really improved upon in the prequels. So I think that's a good representation of that. So that brings our consensus to the kitchen fight in the Raid 2, the hallway fight scene in Old Boy, the Bride versus the Crazy 88s in Kill Bill, and the Darth Maul fight scene in A Phantom Menace as our Mount Rushmore. So that leaves us, we're at 2 hours right now. Do you guys want to do our final one and just knock it out of the way, or do you guys want to save it for next time we do this
I'm
episode?
alright with either. I don't have anything. I don't have
I think the next one won't be too super like big discussions. I think movie Creatures and Animals we can knock out in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah,
I can do. Yeah, I'm good with doing it.
Want me to just buzz through our live comments real quick, or at least some of the better ones?
Yeah. Any live comments we have, go from.
Yeah. So Mason, a lot of it's Mason. He said, "I accept your challenge, Doop. I will even battle you with one arm taped behind my back." Mason also says, "Bobby with a damn near perfect list. A list only surpassed in quality by his good looks." He also says, "You guys forgot Warner Brothers versus
licks.
their director's visions." And he also said 3 of the 4 could literally be the Raid.
The whole list could be the Raid.
Spinner 58 said Johnny's right about Star Wars fights, and Mason agreed. Mason also says, shout out Bobby for throwing in the Kingsman church scene. That's what movies are all about. Fun, spectacle, the whole deal.
And murdering
not very innocent
Catholics.
people.
Yeah, and then Mason said best fight scene in a Tarantino movie is Patricia Arquette versus Gandolfini in True Romance, and then that's kind of it.
I disagree.
And then he also just said Vigo's Veiny Vienna. So
there you go.
So
that's the name title of that fight.
So
is this to Tristan?
Yeah, creature
heading our new category.
I'm curious.
We're on the list.
There are so many of these. I was just gonna say there's so many of these. I'm just really curious to see how many crossovers we really have, because we've had a lot of them this whole Mount Rushmore episode.
This was a hard one for me because, like you said, there's so many to pick from. The category is creatures and monsters, so that it's anything that's pretty much like a non-human character in a movie. And my first pick, I went with an animated character. I wanted to represent like the cute and cuddly kind of version of a creature and monster. And my pick for that is Totoro from My Neighbor Totoro. I still think it's a good chance to represent some animated cinema from some Japanese cinema, some anime in this list. My second represents horror creatures. I think horror has tons of great creatures and monsters, and I think the most iconic horror creature and monster is the Xenomorph from Alien. It's practical, it's scary. I think it's very iconic. If you watch the behind-the-scenes footage of them shooting the Xenomorph, you're almost scared just by seeing it in the footage, and it's just like a grainy guy in a costume. And I think that's something that this creatures and monsters category can really lean into, is like cool costumes, cool practical effects, that kind of thing. And to go along with that, I have what I think is probably the best practical effect in a creature, and I think that's Jabba the Hutt from Return of the Jedi. When you look at the behind the scenes of that, there's like 3-4 people inside that puppet moving each individual thing around. There's a guy whose only job is to move the tail, and I think that's the kind of like practical problem solving that I really enjoy about filmmaking in that era. You're not just like, oh, let's CGI it, it'll look cool, whatever. You're seeing these people on set trying to figure out how they're going to make this work. You see, ILM is the groundbreaking effects studio, and I think this is why they are. They're people who can figure out the most interesting cinematic way to do something when you could have easily just like had him be a prop or had him be a one-man puppet. You had this very beautiful looking gross creature that I think is very iconic as well.
Well, what about Pizza the Hut?
Pizza the Hut will
Pretty
be on
good.
my fourth spot, my fifth spot. But my fourth spot is not Pizza the Hut. It is actually what I think is one of the groundbreaking CGI characters. I mentioned practical effects a lot, but I think another appeal is these CGI kind of performance capture characters. And my pick for that is Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. I think that's
Wow.
extremely
Interesting.
groundbreaking effects. You go back and look at it now, and it still looks great. And I think you never. It's easy to go for stuff like Caesar on Planet of the Apes and things like that are a little newer, but I think this movie proves you can do a CGI character and have them be realistic and believable after something like Jar Jar Binks was like a joke. Even though it was groundbreaking tech, it wasn't taken very seriously, and I think this looks incredible, and I think it proved that you can take CGI characters seriously as villains. So those are my 4 picks. I got Davy Jones, Jabba the Hutt, the Xenomorph from Alien, and Totoro from My Neighbor Totoro.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Jabba the Hutt is one I considered. I was kind of going back and forth between two. Mason did come in with a live comment, and I'm going to swap mine out with his. He says, if Tommy Wiseau doesn't make the Mount Rushmore, I'll be fucking livid. So I'm okay with Tommy Wiseau as a
He is a
creature
creature.
monster. in the
For
movie.
what?
A
It's like a
creature.
creature or monster.
How dare you? He's
So,
the human.
so
I'm a man.
I'm not villain, a hero. So, I'm gonna kick off my list with the Xenomorph from Aliens for a lot of the same reasons that Tristan went with it. You know, I wanted to represent the horror. I think it's, and I also used it kind of, I wanted to represent alien creatures in my movie. He was the one with Jabba the Hutt I was going back and forth with. I also wanted to represent like real, you know, actual animals that exist. And so I went with the shark from Jaws. Well, it wasn't an actual shark they used for the movie. You know, it's kind of a shark's real animal. And then I also, like Tristan, wanted to represent the animated creatures, but I went a different direction. He went with Totoro, and I decided to go with Mufasa from The Lion King. I feel like it's a very iconic animated creature. I kind of went back and forth between that and Bambi, but for me personally, I like Mufasa better. And then finally, I had to go with the OG, and I went with Godzilla as kind of the original movie monster. And those are my 4: the Xenomorph, the shark from Jaws, Mufasa, and Godzilla.
All right. Well, I will start off with saying 2 of my honorable mentions were Godzilla and King Kong, but I didn't think they counted necessarily because I think of them more as movie monsters, which I think could be our own separate category. So I did not include them on my list, but that's the only reason why I don't have them. So I'm going with obviously the Xenomorph from Alien. That's been mentioned twice already. That one is making our list. I think that's the most iconic horror creature. And I also went with Bruce the Shark from Jaws. I think that's another one that really changed the game for visual effects in the industry. And they nailed it. And it turned out perfectly because they couldn't properly use it. It wasn't working very well. So they couldn't show the shark as much as they wanted to. And it made Jaws such a perfect film. And it showed that adapting to things not, working the way you intended can make a film stronger. I also went with another Spielberg film. I went with the T-Rex from Jurassic Park because that was Bruce the Shark but perfected. That was Bruce the Shark, but we're going to do it in the perfect way that I imagined it being the first time around. So I think the T-Rex in Jurassic Park is the perfect one for this. I think that's a good creature. Whether it's CGI or practical, they nail it, and it's effects that have held up almost 20 years later, and they're still better than most of the effects that are coming out now. And then I went with the most iconic one of all time, and I think I'm surprised that no one else had this on the list. Toto from The Wizard of Oz. Toto is such an iconic animal and something that has stuck out in pop culture, something that's so prominent in the film. It's an animal that doesn't need dialogue. It's not an animated character that needs to speak like a Bambi or a Dumbo. Which could have been on this list, but Toto is just a dog, and they give it personality. You know who Toto is because the film just uses that creature / animal very well, and I think Toto deserves a spot on this Mount Rushmore for being such an iconic animal in the film. Probably the most iconic animal in any film ever made, I would argue. So those are my 4. Bobby, what is your Mount Rushmore?
All right, so 2 of mine have been mentioned. I do want to shout out a couple. Nice. A couple of honorable mentions. I have a No Face from Spirited Away. I was kind of thinking along the same lines as Tristan with Totoro. Chewbacca I considered as a good creature and also kind of one of our main hero characters. Caesar from Planet of the Apes, and Bruce, obviously from Jaws. I just didn't include him, but because I think, like Johnny said, there was another creature that kind of did the Jaws thing a little better. So to start off with that, yeah, I did have the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. They did it amazingly with a combination, like Johnny said, of practical and CGI. It works both ways. It's menacing. It's scary. The roar they created, just the noise they created for that dinosaur that didn't exist before that point, has become iconic. And just it's one of those kind of perfect villain characters that has a kind of a hero turn at the end. And I think it's just
Face
perfected
turn,
very well.
baby.
Yeah, face turn. The other one that's been mentioned by everyone has been the Xenomorph. That's like one of the most iconic creations of all time, one of the scariest creations, and executed perfectly with practical effects. The other thing I wanted to go with something that's not necessarily scary, a little cuter. I went with Gizmo from Gremlins. We had a dog named Gizmo. It's iconic from the times. Everyone kind of knows what it is. It's a cute, fluffy creature that would be a perfect pet unless you feed it after midnight or get it wet. And it's just an iconic creature that I fell in love with as a little kid. And the last one that I'm surprised, and maybe it's because people didn't think of him as a creature, but as far as perfecting the CGI creature, what you can do with it, and creating a character, it's the Gollum Smeagol character creature from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Maybe it's just not you think of him more as a humanoid person, but if he's a creature, I think he blows away, Davy Jones or any creature from Pirates of the Caribbean as far as a CGI performance capture, creature. Andy Serkis is the king of that, and I think this was his first time to really show it. So that's my 4.
I will say if I didn't consider Gollum as counting necessarily on the list, but if I did, I would have definitely used him over Davy Jones.
Yeah, he was like borderline for me of like I don't know if this
I think Gollum to me didn't count because he started off as a basically, I mean, as a human, I guess, but as a hobbit. But I didn't quite count him because even though he has divulged into creature-like qualities, I don't think he necessarily started off that way and is technically a creature, unless you want to say like Frodo was a creature. So I think he kind of counts in the same category. That's the only reason I didn't go with him. I do think I agree with Bobby though, as far as like his honorable mention, Caesar is a way better movie animal creature than Davy Jones as far as the technology involved.
Yeah, but it was
that.
like 10 years later. If you want to talk about creating the ground for it, I think Davy Jones, you wouldn't have Caesar if you didn't have Davy Jones. And you look at the behind the scenes of that movie, and it's like every little inch of that is computerized, and I think it shows the technology.
But I would say that while we're not maybe not counting Gollum, I think the Davy Jones thing is just inspired by Gollum, and then Caesar is also inspired by Gollum. I don't think Caesar was inspired by Davy Jones. It's not like that was the groundbreaking character that really influenced the thing. Like we already talked about motion capture really was influenced by Andy Serkis, and I think that started with Lord of the Rings. So I think if you go by influential character in terms of that motion capture, it's Gollum, but I don't necessarily count him, so I'd go Caesar because I think that's just done better than Davy Jones.
And the only reason, so the character that anyone in the special effects industry kind of says like this showed what you can do with performance capture and visual effects wise, people were like awestruck by it. Was Jar Jar Binks, but there's no possible way that you could include Jar Jar on this list. But he was inspirational for sure. But Gollum. Yeah. To me, he is a creature. I mean, no one looks at that as he is now and says that's a human. Like, yeah, he might have started as a hobbit, but he's this decrepit little, gray, whatever type of thing.
That's like borderline. I wasn't like, oh, this doesn't count. But I was like, so I was like, I didn't put it on my list. Yeah. That's
why. My other couple ones that weren't mentioned were sticking with Jurassic Park, the Velociraptors. Mm-hmm. They nailed that. And the And then obviously Bambi, Dumbo. Sorry.
Wow.
Bambi, Dumbo, Simba, any Lion King character, Baloo from the Jungle Book. You know, like you have all those from Disney. But I think the other one that is a possibility is the Panel Man from Pan's Labyrinth. Really, almost made my list. That was such an influential practical effect character in a world of the early to mid 2000s was such a world of CGI that Pan's Labyrinth really brought everyone back to being able to use both and kind of do it well because you have the CGI fairies, but then you have the practical effects of the Pale Man. And I think Guillermo del Toro kind of nailed that. So that was another one I super considered. But overall, I think obviously we have the Xenomorph. All four of us had the Xenomorph. So that's a home run. We have commonality on two others. We have two for Bruce the Shark, and we have two for the T-Rex.
I didn't vote for either one, but if I'm gonna break the tie, I think I'd go for the T-Rex. I think that just has a lot of really iconic moments, and I think of that chase scene with the Jeep, and it's like that is just such an incredible feat of effects. And the shark is cool, but I think it's like Johnny said, it's more of like you're working against the effect rather than with it. And I think the T-Rex really showcase like what you can do with these effects.
Yeah, the shark, even at the time it came out, people thought it was scary, but when you actually showed the shark, it wasn't even.
Shark still looks fake.
Yeah, right. It still looks fake. Like they joke
disagree.
about that.
I think it,
but it's iconic. But I would, if you're gonna include one of those two, it's got to be the T-Rex because they had to shoot around the shark.
I think if you go for impact and like monumental filmmaking, you go for the shark in Jaws. But I think if you go for what's maybe a more executed character, you go for the T-Rex. I think that was everything they intended it to be. But if you look at the cultural impact of Jaws, people were legitimately afraid to go in the water for 20 years after that movie came out, and no one had that effect on dinosaurs. Like no one was afraid to go to a zoo because something might attack them. People were legitimately afraid to go in the ocean because of Jaws. So I don't think the argument of it didn't really look real works, because I think it looks pretty real. But I agree that the T-Rex is just a well done creature in film. So maybe that's just like executed better.
And maybe they both deserve it, but let's argue for maybe a couple other ones.
As someone who only had the shark and not the T-Rex, I would say if the T-Rex makes it on, the shark shouldn't, because it's kind of representing of the same thing, and I think it's an either-or situation.
And I do think that T-Rex has a lot of iconic moments. You mentioned that heel turn he has at the end, that big roaring scene where the banner falls on him. That's like one of the biggest iconic shots of a movie. I think he has the iconography of the shark as well. It's just done a little bit better.
I think so, but I also think that like if we look at what else has made these lists,
and I feel like if
nothing else has been on multiple lists. The only other one that has been on two lists is the shark in Jaws. You have, other than that, you have Gizmo, you have Gollum, which if we count Gollum, I think he makes the list.
Yeah.
So that's more up for the debate of do we count him or not, because if we do, he definitely deserves it. We have Godzilla, which I don't think counts because I think that is more of a monster, which I think is different than like a creature / animal. That's my only thing there. We have Mufasa, which no one else had, but I do think in that same movie you could argue Simba or Pumbaa or Timon, and Mufasa. I think and Scar. I think there are maybe too many. I would almost
argue animal that if we wanted to have an animated animal, I would almost argue the animal that no one had, and go with like Bambi as like the original kind of animated animal.
Bambi or Dumbo, you could go with those. Those are both in my honorable mentions. I could see that. And then you have Tristan's off the board of, I don't think Davy Jones belongs anywhere near this, but I think Jabba the Hutt is a very good one. Yeah. I think having something from Star Wars is maybe
we had Spinner.
You gotta have something from Star Wars, right?
That was Yoda. That was
Yoda, Jabba.
I think Jabba's a little more ambitious. It has a lot more chance to fail. There's like 3-4 people inside that versus like a well-known trained
puppeteer.
Yeah, Frank Oz doing a puppet versus
but it's also
a full-size character.
But also, if the puppet doesn't work, that whole movie's crap. Where with Return of the Jedi, it's just okay. That opening scene kind of sucked. But if Yoda doesn't work, then Empire Strikes Back is just
and personally I think Empire is the best Star Wars movie, and I think a lot of that hinges on how good Yoda is. So my argument might be for Yoda there, even though no one mentioned it.
And if I can make another argument for the shark, I would say, as far as the T-Rex goes, there are multiple dinosaurs in that movie that they're fighting against. You have the Velociraptor, the Velociraptors. You have all of these different dinosaurs. Where as far as Jaws, it's just the shark. The shark is
that's my thing. I think maybe the T-Rex makes it, but I think Jaws deserves it because you have such an iconic character that is the focal point. If the shark fails, that whole movie fails. If the T-Rex fails, you still have all of the other parts of Jurassic Park. You still have the Velociraptor scene, which is probably the better than anything of the T-Rex, you know? So I think personally, like if the shark failed as it did in real life, but how they portrayed it succeeded, I think Jaws goes from failing completely to being the greatest movie ever made. Personally, I don't think we can have a Mount Rushmore without Bruce the Shark. I don't think that's possible. I think he is as iconic as the Xenomorph.
I think as we've argued about it, I think even though they were kind of similar concepts, I think they both should be on the list.
I think so too.
They're both so iconic. I mean, even though they're done in similar ways, and maybe the T-Rex is a better executed version, but again, you don't have the T-Rex type of impact without Jaws. But there was such a big step forward in creatures from the whole Jurassic Park movie in general, and the T-Rex is the epitome of that. So I think they both should be on there.
Yeah, and I agree, just because if you look at Jurassic Park, you have nothing else that came before it that matched the CGI quality. And if you think of Jaws, you have nothing else that matched just the practical quality. You have nothing that was before Star Wars. That was, basically the only thing that you could compare to Jaws before that was claymation characters. They never did anything like Bruce the Shark before, and they nailed it. So I think those two, yes, they're by the same director, but I think both of those deserve to be on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, the more he talks about it, I kind of start to agree. Sure, it's the same director, but we had more than one John Williams theme on there. I think a really good filmmaker is a really good filmmaker, and I think it's sad to knock off some of the stuff. Like, I do think that we should have some animation representation on here. I think Totoro is a significantly iconic character. I think it also shows that when you make a creature and monster, it doesn't have to be like grounded in practical reality. It can just be this weird kind of creature. Something like Totoro, something like even Jabba the Hutt, I think really shows the potential of creatures and monsters. You're not just like, oh, it's a shark, or it's, I guess Xenomorph has that too, but I just think the appeal of creature and monster is you can get beyond like the limitations of practical reality. You can do something that's just unfathomable to the normal human eye.
Yeah.
So my vote for the last one would either be, I think Totoro kind of gets off the list because while I love that movie, and while a lot of people who follow Studio Ghibli love that movie, I think there are plenty more iconic creatures in Spirited Away, and that's the much more influential Studio Ghibli movie. I think that kind of hurts it. I think the argument goes for Gizmo, because how many fucking people do we know? Me, Bobby, Alex, like anyone I know that had like a Shih Tzu or a small dog named their dog Gizmo, even if they weren't even born in that era. Like Bobby and I were born plenty after Gremlins was a thing, but we grew up with it. I think that is a super just influential character for that reason. Or I would go Jabba the Hutt, which was on Tristan's list, because it was something, again, we've never seen before. We've never seen a full body, kind of animatronic, but, more like people moving the tail, like Tristan mentioned. We've seen puppets. We've seen Yoda work. Like before, you could have told me that was going to work if it was Frank Oz, but Jabba the Hutt was a risk. I think it's either Jabba or Gizmo if I'm going for the last spot. While, yes, I agree, maybe animated should be counted for, I think there's just too many that cancel each other out.
I also think we could make an argument for Toto on your list. I think having like a practical real animal would be a good
Toto. Okay, so I forgot about Toto. Here's my argument for Toto. Every other character we have on this list, Bruce the Shark, it's a horror thing. Xenomorph is a horror thing. T-Rex in a way is a horror thing. Toto is just like a genuine character and it's just a dog. It's not a puppet. It's not practical effects. It's not CGI. It's just a dog, and it has so much personality I think nothing else has ever done that. I think
Oh.
Marley and Me is such an iconic film, like for some reasons, but like that's a dog that has personality. But you have no Marley and Me without Toto. Toto was the first dog with a real personality, with a real like screen presence, and I think Toto is the most iconic. If you looked at all animals in the history of film, I think Toto is the most iconic.
Yeah.
And I almost forgot about it until Tristan mentioned that I fucking said it.
So what do we got that's locked in right now?
So we have Xenomorph, the T-Rex, and Bruce the Shark, and we need one more spot. So
Yeah,
I think we either go puppet, animated, or Toto.
I would absolutely love to have Gizmo on the list just personally, but I do think as far as like one of the first creatures or animals, like you said with Toto, I think that's pretty iconic. So I'd be okay losing Gizmo to put Toto up there. It's another in the cute realm where I was trying to go for with Gizmo instead of picking like a gremlin from the same movie. So I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with Toto too. We
Yeah,
had
I'm
like
good
the
with Toto.
practical horror character covered with Xenomorph, and I think that as much as I think Jabba the Hutt is such an interesting, groundbreaking effect, I think Xenomorph has that also with the practical costume and that kind of stuff. So I think Toto is good because it covers that. For a Mount Rushmore, it'd be good to have like an actual little animal, like a CGI creature, not an effect, like an actual animal. And I think Toto is by miles the best animal.
And while I talk about Gizmo being the name for everyone's dog, I guarantee in the 40s and 50s, Toto was like the most popular dog name. You know, like there's probably no way to tell that, but how could it not be? It's the most famous dog ever put on screen.
Lassie would
Other
probably.
than maybe Lassie. Yeah.
Maybe, but that was again years later. You know, so you could see it, but I think Toto's the right one to go here if you go by film.
Yeah, I think we're all agreeing on Toto.
Yep.
And that's good for me because that's literally my entire list. So we have our consensus movie change up for our final category of movie creatures or animals. We have the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, which, yes, I had on my list, but we all had the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, Bruce the Shark from Jaws, and Toto from Wizard of Oz. So I think that's a good encapsulation of eras. I think that's a good encapsulation of genres.
Somehow Johnny talked his way into making the whole category his own, you know?
I honestly forgot I even put Toto until Tristan mentioned it, and then I was like, oh shit, of course it should be fucking Toto. And
yeah,
then,
I couldn't let us move on without Toto. That's just such an iconic character.
Yeah, that one was one I was happy I thought of. That was one of the first ones I thought of. That was probably the first one I thought of out of any category. I was like, oh, Toto for animal for sure. And I think that was a lock. So I think we had some really great consensus films here as far as Mount Rushmores go. Yep. So I'm excited for this format, and I think going forward we could do some really interesting stuff with this. So let's wrap it up real quick. We wanted to end this at like 2 hours, and then we went further with it.
We'll just do like 6 or 7 categories next time, but
yeah, but it was fun. This was a really interesting episode to change up our.
Yeah, it's called movie change up. You gotta change it up.
Exactly.
That's how it goes.
Yep, for sure.
But yeah, do we want to do final thoughts or just cut to the end?
Just cut to the end. We don't really. We kind of went over honorable mentions. We kind of went over everything. So Joe, wrap it up.
Yeah, maybe just follow us on social media. We'll post our consensus lists on everything, and you guys can leave your thoughts.
Yeah, and let us know what other topics you want us to cover on this kind of an episode. Like we did pretty much all comic movies this time. So if you think there's another like special topic, or if you just want us to do like our top Mount Rushmore of this or this, I would love to get suggestions in the comments for the next episodes. Because like Joe said, we're probably gonna do like 5 or 6 for the next one, and figure out our hot spot for time. So if you guys have ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably clip some of these out, and put them up on YouTube. We'll put our, consensus list. This kind of thing will be delved out over our social media over the next few days or few weeks or so. Next week, we're not doing a normal movie change-up episode again. What we're gonna do is our spoiler review for the Zack Snyder Justice League. We've wanted to do it, and I think next week at our movie change-up time is really the only time where all 4 of us are gonna have to be able to do it. And then after that, we're going to be back to doing our normal movie change-up episodes, but that's going to be in April. And we have some really fun ideas because of April Fools. I think we're going to just kind of do some weird and fun episodes throughout the month of April. I think it's going to be a great time. So yeah, check us out. Be a friend, tell a friend. So
watch the Snyder Cut.
Yeah, do that. Have a nice day.